Hello everyone, welcome to episode 75 of the Lookout Sir Warhammer 40,000 podcast. My name is Dan, and it is my job, there you go, nice and simple, to do the intro bit. And I'm joined as ever by my good buddy Phil. How's it going, Phil?
Phil/producer. Yes, I'm very good, thank you.
Oh, he's still carrying that. Is that really still sticking with you from last week?
I mean, why not?
Why not? Why not? You're welcome to a producer credit, Phil. I mean, some might say you've earned it.
I mean, I'd hope so.
Exactly. I was only playing for fun there, Phil. I was only taking the mickey.
I went out and I bought a nice fancy mic so I don't sound like I'm down a tunnel crackling on an old dial-up connection. That deserves like the producer credit alone.
Well, exactly. I feel like you've pretty much been able to, obtain that privilege throughout. But I guess obviously, well, there you go. Is what it is, isn't it? Is what it is. But it's a pleasure to have you as always, Phil. Always a delight to get to do the Lookout Sir 40k podcast with your good self.
Exactly. It's a pleasure to be on the other end.
Exactly. What a treat for us all. So today, what are we talking about, Phil? Tell them what we're talking about.
Speaking of treats, we are finally doing it. I'm subjecting Dan to Crusade, the narrative way of playing Warhammer 40k, according to the rules writers.
I mean, we'll get into the narrative way to play 40k in just a little bit. But before we do that, we have, of course, a 5-star review.
Well, howdy, partner. These boys keep joshing us about with all their chitter-chatter about little plastic figurines. They've asked me to do this jingle for them. I don't know what they're talking about half the time. But anyway, now it's time for that 5-star review. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the show. And let's all pray that it doesn't go on as long as it did last week. Yeehaw!
This week's 5-star review comes from Apple Podcasts of Great Britain, and it is made available to us by the good people of Bitesized Wargaming, who, by all accounts, could be an individual or potentially a group of people. We haven't done the research. We don't know. Do we, Phil?
I mean, it sounds like a shameless plug for something, so go check it out. Why not?
Exactly. Whatever it may be. Unless, of course, it's not very good, in which case, oopsie daisy. But whether or not they're not good, we care not, because they said we're good in the form of a 5-star review that reads, worth listening to, 5 stars. I've gotten back into 40k podcasting listening since a recent change of jobs and commuting by bus. So there you go. Individual is commuting by bus and now is able to listen to podcasts, most notably the Lookout Sir 40k podcast, which by the amount of content that we put out there is pretty much the only podcast you need, right, Phil?
Of course. That's
there you go.
The one-stop shop.
But, irrespective of that, the suggestion is that podcasts help while the journey time away, which could indicate that this person is listening to more than just one podcast, although why that would be, I'd never know. Surely this is the only one that you'd ever want, right, Phil?
If it's anything like me, I'd be listening to the podcast and then nodding off on my commute. So perfect dulcet tones to fall asleep to.
Missing your stop.
Exactly.
There you go. Lookout Sir is a new one on my radar, having only come to it in the last month or so. So I didn't experience its previous format and additional host that is often mentioned. Ooh. We do often mention the previous host, don't we?
We'll cut him out from now on. Let's commit from now on. He's dead to us.
He's dead to us. Yeah. Dead to us. Although, no, he's not dead to us. We love him greatly and we miss him. That's basically where we're at with it. It's always why we have to kind of, reference him on all occasions because we just miss him deeply. Where was I with this? The host that I often mentioned. They make a lot of their rambling format, which I suppose isn't for everyone. I mean, I feel like it could be for everyone. Don't you think, Phil?
Give it a try.
But once you shake the tree and discern the wheat from the chaff, there's some good hobby content in there. I mean, is that a compliment or is that potentially a little bit of a
I think it's a compliment.
Dig?
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah.
We'll take it. All right. As a former 40k related podcast host myself, 40k for old men at AMP ; 6S 2 hits almost 10 years ago now. I mean, again, 6s to hit, I suppose that is what it's supposed to read, not 6s to hit.
Yes, that does sound like that's how it's pronounced.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely the pronunciation.
So
I know how difficult. Sorry, what was that?
He's done 2 podcasts, not just one.
He's done 2 podcasts. 40k for old men. It should have been no 40k for old men, surely.
Maybe we should get him on to replace that person that we said we weren't going to talk about.
No, we don't. We don't need more people. It's better with just you and me, Phil. Better.
Exactly.
We don't need anyone else. Anyway, yeah, so he did that 10 years ago and is now stating, I know how difficult it can be to produce regular content in sufficient quantities. So well done for doing it. There you go. Obviously, I mean, all of your praise and appreciation for how difficult this is. I mean, that's what I would say all the time, Phil. We definitely struggle week in, week out to get this done, don't we? I mean, it's a chore, an absolute chore.
I mean, why do you think we're having to rummage around and dig out some Crusade stuff to talk about? We're just we're out of ideas, basically.
Yeah,
the well is dry.
We are really scraping the barrel right now. Although I always think it's kind of fun, but it is also a challenge in some respect. But anyway, whilst it does occasionally lose focus, it's ultimately worth persevering with and an enjoyable listen. Cheers, Simon Foley, aka Bitesized Wargaming on YouTube, Insta, Facebook, and Twitter.
Well, we've got to check them out now.
Exactly. There is an individual who has taken advantage of our quite open offer to plug your stuff via the Lookout Sir 40k podcast in exchange for a 5-star review. Right, Phil?
He read the memo and he took it to heart and he's cashed that check.
Indeed. Will you check out Simon Foley, aka Bitesized Wargaming, at some point?
Oh, I will indeed now. Yeah.
There you go. I actually think when I first read this review, because I did read this review prior to doing that reading right there, I do think I actually did go over there and subscribe to him. But now I can't remember. I think he has like videos of like models and painting and stuff. Phil, you're looking right now. Please, for the love of God, tell me that you found something.
I'm just having a look now. Let's have a little.
Is there models and paintings and stuff?
And interval, and then I'll come back.
Hi there! I'm Judy from well-known couple Richard and Judy. When I'm not writing sexy books or getting my toes licked by Richard, well, then I'm listening to the Lookout Sir podcast. And I applaud everybody who's doing it too. Richard, come in here and tell me I'm pretty. Richard!
So yeah, as suspected, there are models and paintings and stuff. Lots of camo. That's the general theme. He does a lot of, non-40k stuff and 40k stuff. But yeah, camo schemes all over the place, right, Phil?
Yep, a lot of camo, a bit of bolt action by the looks of it as well.
A bit of what? Never heard of it.
Bit bolt, yeah.
No, obviously, other war games are available. And Phil, what would you like to say to Bitesized Wargaming?
Well, thank you very much for your shameless plug. I'm sure we're all going to go and check it out now. Looks very good. Thank you for the review as always. We do try our best to make this an interesting podcast. Don't worry, there are still plenty of ideas still to come. It's not just Crusade and other stories. There will be other things coming down the line.
There you go. Filling them with confidence about our ability to produce content. Well done, Phil.
Exactly.
Making them feel, safe in our warm embrace.
We know what we're doing.
Exactly. We're no fly-by-night podcast. We've almost been doing this for 3 years, Phil.
Oh, dear God.
I know. So much wasted potential.
I could have painted another army with all that spare time.
No, you couldn't have. That'd be ridiculous. Not the way you paint.
At least 3 units.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe 3 models. Anyway, transitional noise. Let's get on with it. Woo! So welcome back, everyone, in this part of the podcast. As is evident by the title and or the fact that this is the main segment of the show, we are going to talk about the good old gaming system known as Crusade, which for some reason Games Workshop has titled in their rulebook as narrative play. Why do you suppose that might be, Phil?
Well, cynically, I could just say, because it is.
Because it is.
Because it is, or because that's what they think it is.
That's what they think it is. Now, everyone who has listened to the show to some extent from the outset understand my position on Crusade. I haven't spent much time with it prior to actually doing the research. You may not know it, but I'm going to tell you. I have many pages of notes that I took here as I went through the process of reading paragraph by paragraph, page by page, word by word, all of the rules that make up Crusade. And I have formed opinions based on those words and or a bit of a broad interpretation of how I imagine this will work in game. Full disclosure, neither myself nor Phil have played a Crusade. We have played lots of 40k, and as a result, I'm able to derive some conclusions based on the Crusade rules. But due to the impact of COVID, it has not been possible for us to play a Crusade, right, Phil?
100%. I think it's something that, you know, I'm going to force down your throat at some point when we can actually physically do such a thing.
I mean, rather that than some other things, eh?
Well, exactly, yes. So, yeah, I think it would be good to try at some point down the line. But yes, caveating, this is just speculation based on having read the rules and whether we think those rules are interesting or not.
And I suppose it's worth highlighting as well for those listening that from the outset, I am much more negative about this experience, and
Ooh.
Phil is much more optimistic about it, right?
Yay! Yes, 100%.
So, in many respects, you know, for the sake of you know, fun, I think it's actually going to be quite good that we're coming at this from different perspectives. Because, again, it's like one of those, you know, people with like the trestle tables sat out in a, you know, public space. I've just gone, you know, Crusade. I don't like Crusade. Prove me wrong, or something.
Change my mind.
Change my mind.
Well, so this is the thing. When 9th edition came out and they talked about Crusade, or even when the book came out, I was very much like, Crusade sounds really interesting. I'd like to give it a go. You were very much like, I don't care. I've got the GT mission pack. See you later, guys. That is the two. Yeah. That's the two opinions that we're coming at it from, I think.
Yeah, and look, I mean, here's the thing, right? Please don't misunderstand me here. I like narrative gaming. I really do. And I like campaign systems. I love the Forge World Imperial Armor series. I think it is one of the greatest campaign narrative things that Games Workshop has ever created. And in some ways, creates incredible narrative structures that enable players, creatively minded players, to create fun, interesting, narrative-driven gameplay decisions within the 40k gameplay system and deliver something that is actually truly really interesting and narrative themed. For me, from the outset, I feel like Games Workshop have gone quite mechanical with this, and I feel like what they've essentially tried to do is focus more on a Blood Bowl-esque campaign league system rather than trying to create something that gives you the tool sets to create narrative. And again, this is something that I'm going to call back to throughout this process is that for me, I would have liked to have seen almost like a D&D style rule set where we were given tools as players to create scenarios and create, you know, situations that have narrative flavor, and then some light campaign, you know, roster themed rules that would enable me to add interesting flavor, because this definitely gives you flavor, but I worry that it falls short on the narrative. And I guess we're going to get into that. But I mean, Phil, what's your kind of elevator pitch in terms of your side of this equation right now?
I would say you've gone into this trial and you've pitched your final summary rather than your initial opening, because you kind of just explained it all. But I would say you are right to an extent that it is much more mechanical. It is very much the main focus of it is about sort of leveling up your units as you play battles, and it gives you the framework to tell a story. It doesn't really tell you how to tell that story, But I think, especially the missions, it's like you can find the narrative elements to Crusade in there. It just doesn't tell you how to go about doing it. And I think that's probably the bit that needs refinement and work, and may well exist in the expansions such as Beyond the Veil, which was the Necron Crusade book. And I think, you know, if we ever get around to it, if we look at things like the Codex sort of Crusade options, I think there'd be some more interesting narrative stuff in there. But from the outset, I think it's kind of a good basis from where to go. But as you say, I think Blood Bowl is a really good example. It's about leveling up your models. And that's sort of like the framework. What I like about it is it's sort of similar to how Warcry was done. It's like you can do this and you can go, I'm taking my Crusade force and I can play against you. I can then go and play against, you know, some people in my local club. I can then take this to Warhammer World potentially and play some complete random people, but still use my Crusade army. You're not tied into a specific campaign with a specific, you know, number of people. You can dive in and out, and this can be a kind of forever growing Crusade potentially. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's really interesting is the opening statement on narrative play on page 305 of the rulebook. The term narrative play can apply to many different types of games and styles of play. One of the most common ways to engage in narrative play is to recreate famous battles found in codexes, campaign books, and Black Library novels, pitting your armies and strategies against those of an opponent to see if you change the course of history. Another is to wage in a campaign which a set group of players fight a series of missions over weeks, months, or even years. And this is essentially the core concept of Crusade. And it's interesting because obviously from the outset, they've kind of laid their cards on the table saying narrative play incorporates a bunch of different stuff. Crusade is this bit of it. Now, maybe, just maybe, the aspiration is that they're going to do a series of other books. In fact, we know they're going to do other books. We know we've seen them do other books that address some of those broader ideals, because obviously Imperial Armor still exists as a framework. So does the events of Vigilus, and so too will the events of the upcoming campaign book featuring the Death Guard taking on another planet or whatever they were doing with that book that is coming down the line. So I suppose they've been quite open with it, but broadly speaking, the idea of Crusade is to inject flavor into your armies. But that's where it starts to get really interesting to me, because I feel like there's a number of problems with the way that they've laid this out. And I do feel like the way I would broadly describe it and have done, it's like putting a hat on a hat. It's one of the things I've consistently said. But let's get into it. So the first thing on page 306 is Crusade Faction. And this is all the same restrictions as you would be used to, but essentially your Crusade Faction is determined by the broader, larger keywords of Imperium, Chaos, Aeldari, Tyranids, Orcs, Necrons, and Tau Empire, which essentially means that if you're a Orcs, Necrons, or Tau Empire player, you have significantly less options than Imperium, Chaos, Aeldari, and even the Tyranids, who incorporate Genestealer Cult, and by extension, the forces of the Astra Militarum. Or at least I believe so. Did the Astra Militarum gain the Tyranid keyword when they become Brood Brothers?
Oh, now you're talking.
I feel like you could probably extend that as an olive branch to the
because I was looking through this list and I was saying, where does GSE probably fit under? Obviously, it's meant to be Tyranids, but you could argue it's also Imperium to an extent.
No, because all GSE have all Genestealer Cult have the Tyranid keyword.
Okay, so yeah, it must be that. And I assume Brood Brothers gain it when.
Yeah,
as part
you
of
would broadly assume.
Keyword, yeah.
But yeah, Orcs, Necrons, Tau Empire are all kind of left out in the cold because they don't have any, pool of resources that they can build upon.
Tau have crew. Let's give them some credit.
Yeah, but that's all just incorporated into the broader kind of Tau Empire build. There isn't. Well, yeah, they've got the Vespids as well, right?
Yeah, Tau have a broad array of cool allies, but they just never expanded upon them, which is a shame.
And they're all just located within the confines of one codex and maybe and one psychic awakening. But anyway, irrespective of that, yeah. So obviously, when you play Imperium, you've got a real broad spectrum of things to choose from. Chaos, Aeldari, the same, and Tyranids to a certain extent. But yeah, normal kind of things apply there. I mean, there's not really much to say beyond the Crusade factions, other than the fact that,
I think it allows you to do allies effectively. You know, you could take sisters with guard and custodies. I think a lot of people will just kind of go mono-faction because if you're doing narrative, that sort of is what it feels like you should be doing. Unless you get to those really larger games where you might want to bring in some allies, but anyone can create their own story and justification for having like a squad of sisters join a guard army, for example.
Well, one of the interesting things about this, and I suppose this is point one, is that essentially what you're creating with your Crusade faction, or rather your order of battle, which is the next thing, is you're not creating armies, you're creating a pool of resources. So essentially you're building units up to a power level of 50, as is outlined within the order of battle initially. And within that order of battle, you can take stuff from all over the Imperium should you want to.
Yeah.
But when it comes to playing a game, you need to follow the rules of engagement for that game. So if you and I were going to play a Strike Force game, which is the 25 power level variant, I believe, not Strike Force, sorry, Combat Patrol, which is 25 power level, you would have a 50 power level order of battle, and you would pull 25 power level out of that, and then you would still need to build a battle forged 25 points power level to play. And I suppose, and again, we're going to potentially be getting ahead of ourselves here, but we'll talk about it in more detail soon. But I suppose that's one of the interesting aspects of this rule system to me, is it does feel quite rigid in so much as it doesn't seem to give you the flexibility and freedom that you might expect from a narrative system. It's not like spelling out interesting kind of battle scenarios or things that could be fun. It's very much a case of, yeah, you create this pool of resources, but when it comes down to it, we're still just playing 25 power level games with a few checks and balances, and in terms of what those units have accrued.
Yeah, I think that you're meant to see it though as this is your crusading force. Your 50 power level is your boys on or girls on a ship flying around space, going on adventures effectively, and then 25 power level of them, so half of your army is going to drop down from that ship onto a planet to do a mission of some kind. So that is how I look at it in terms of it is quite narrative. You've got your roster of your army, but not everyone is going to battle on every single mission. And what's interesting is it is very similar to Kill Team's campaign system in terms of you do have this roster that is much larger than the army that you actually take when you go to battle. And what's interesting...
Well, not in all instances, right? Because in order to get up to the point where you can feasibly start to take a strike force, you need to double the capacity of your army. So you need to double the capacity of your order of battle to enter into strike force games. And that's 100% of your stuff would need to go. Because a strike force game, a 2,000 point game, is 100 power level. An incursion game is 50. Now, that was always one of those interesting things to me, because one of the things that's weird to me is if played as written, the scalability of it becomes quite strange because it becomes quite rigid early doors. And I do feel like with narrative players, more so than competitive players, maybe more so than competitive players, but maybe as much, if not more so, these guys are more likely to want to bring big forces or express bigger kind of things. You know, these are the kind of guys that painstakingly build and paint titans and put that kind of stuff together because they're much more invested in some narrative ideas. So that 50 power level restriction becomes interesting because it does limit your ability to to start playing bigger games from the outset. Now, you could argue that within the confines of what they're trying to create, which is a kind of Tale of Four Gamers system, essentially, which is a system whereby you slow grow, this is a perfectly viable strategy. But I do worry about it in relation to, does it do you need to play it with that level of rigidity? Would you potentially prefer to be able to agree that maybe you build 125 power level order of battle to start with, or does that sort of spit in the face of the system?
I think the system's flexible enough that if you go, oh, actually, let's start at 100 power level rather than 50, cool. I think from a narrative point of view, it's actually better to start small and grow. It's like, it's a bit like the Eisenhorn books. You know, you start off with small skirmishes and then you build up to the big army battles. If you straight away are pretty much doing an apocalypse-sized game, you've kind of got nowhere to go. It's much better to do, we're doing a patrol, like a literal patrol on a planet, and we're having a few skirmishes with some enemies, and then we're slowly getting bigger and bigger. But I do think on the outset, Crusade is designed as a bit of a slow grow system, where it is either deliberately designed for people starting new armies, or it's designed to ease people into it so people can start small and amass a collection. They might already have a big collection, but I think it is sort of aimed at people with new armies.
I mean,
or at least
obviously
a cater for them, I think.
Yeah, and obviously that's the intent, right? But what starts to surprise me is the way that it's written doesn't suggest that flexibility, right? So the way it's written is Crusade forces cannot exceed 50 power level, right? That's what it says. They're basically spelling out to you that when you start playing a Crusade force, it has to be 50 power level. Now, again, we all understand that we can be flexible. We all understand that there is, opportunities to approach the game the way you want to approach it, but that's not how they've written it. So you effectively, when you're playing Crusade, if you're doing it the way it's been designed, you start at 50 power level and you have to play X many games to earn the ability to unlock a larger army in order to play bigger scale games. Now, that's not a problem necessarily, because again, within the spirit of what it's trying to be, you're building up, blah, blah, blah. But it is interesting to see that they have designed it as written anyway, with that level of rigidity, that there's not an amount of flex in that. It's not like they've said, if you'd like to start 100, you can. If you'd like to do 150, you can. It's very much, you have to start with 50, which again feels quite Blood Bowl-y. Again, it feels quite, it feels like a campaign system quite heavily inspired by games like Blood Bowl.
I think if you want to start playing 2,000 point games, you very quickly run out of places to go, because there's only so many 2,000 point missions in the core rulebook. If you start off doing your combat patrols and then going into, Strike Force before the incursions, you basically got a whole another half a game to play. It is a bit like, like something like World of Warcraft. It's like you got to level up, you got to do the grind, you've got to start off small, play those smaller missions, and then build your way up to the bigger events. Otherwise, I don't know, I've not counted, but I imagine you've got like 7 or 6 missions at 2,000 points, and you don't really have anywhere to go beyond that.
Yeah. And if I can just address it at the start here. So in these opening 2 pages, I counted that they have introduced no less, Phil, no less than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 new concepts that you as a player need to start thinking about when you enter Crusade. So those are the order of battle, which essentially is your army list, but it is a army list with extras because it categorizes and tracks a number of additional stipulations, which are also outlined here. So you got your Crusade cards. So your Crusade cards are specific unit cards that contain your unit's information. noting that if, say, for example, Phil took a unit of Lehman Russes that then broke down into 3 individual Lehman Russes, he wouldn't have a Crusader card for 3 Lehman Russes. He'd have 3 separate Crusader cards because they become individual units and need to be tracked individually. But then there's some other instances where they then would also still need to be counted as units for the purposes of other rules. There's the Crusade Force, which is the army and its resources. So you have the Order of Battle, which is the list overall. Then you have the Crusade Force, which is kind of like the specific list that you're using in a game. You have the Crusade cards, which are the individual things. You've got a supply limit, and the supply limit refers to the points and power level available to you. So initially that's going to be 50 power level, but obviously you can accrue or, continue to have, excess power level, or if you haven't spent all of it. You've got requisition points, a thing that you earn throughout the game somehow. And then you also have Crusade points, which measure unit upgrades in some way, shape, or form. Again, it's not very well explained. And then lastly, you have battle tally, which essentially is the number of battles you have played using the Crusade Force. So, yeah, you literally in buried within these paragraphs are loads of extra bits that you now need to start thinking about. You now need to start thinking about, right, I need my order of battle. Then I need my cards. Then I need to break that down into forces. I need to manage my requisition. I need to manage my crusade points. I need to manage my tallies. It's real heavy, don't you think?
I think it is a bit overwhelming when you first read it, but I think once you were to start actually building your army, you've got your Crusade cards out in front of you, of which they don't really exist. You've got to either print off the pages that they supply you. I do believe there's a book that Games Workshop sell that basically has a page for each Crusade card. So there are ways of managing it, and they are obviously going to build it into the Warhammer app, which is something they've announced recently. So that's also, that I think will make playing Crusade a lot easier potentially to track. I do kind of like the idea of physical card as well, which is manageable at a smaller scale games, but at bigger scale, once you've got 10, 15 units, that might be a bit cumbersome. So I think once you get your head around it, it sort of makes sense. So your requisition points, you start with 5. You have a max of 5. You use this to spend on upgrades sort of for your army, but quite often they are specific to units. It tends to be when you're actually requisitioning new units to your army, you can upgrade them. So you can go, I've got a squad of Orc boys that's a 10-man squad, but you can spend 1 requisition point, and it's a bit like a stratagem, and it goes, I can actually now take the maximum number of boys for that squad. So it's a way of building and upgrading your units.
Are you aware of how it is a necessity to use requisition points to gain access to warlord traits and relics? Yeah,
so you start the game with no warlord traits, no relics, nothing like that, with the exception of named characters. They must.
Well, no, even so that's the thing. That isn't true. That you still have to put warlord traits, relics on your combat cards. So they always have to have them on their combat cards, but they can only use them if you pay the requisition.
Oh.
So you have to be rigid with all of this, right? So your warlord always has to be a warlord, and he always has to have the same warlord trait. And the relic always has to be the same relic. But you can't use it unless you pay requisition.
Yeah, so there's the rules around that is effectively nullifying the pre-game stratagems that are normally in a book. So you can't do that. So you can't use your normal stratagems from like your Space Marines Codex to give yourself an extra warlord trait or extra relics. The next page is all about Crusade. Cards. These are effectively custom data sheets for each unit. Now, it doesn't have the data sheet on there. It is specifically to do with accruing experience, XP, and abilities for each unit. Your units can level up, and you can give them abilities. They can also have negative abilities called battle scars, which they can get later on. So there's a bunch of like tallies that you use to keep track of what your units is, what they're actually doing on the battlefield during a mission. So you have a section which is during this battle, so you can keep a score of how many units you've destroyed, or specifically with psychic powers, ranged weapons, melee powers, and then you have an ongoing total which is across all your Crusade games. So you'll add your from this battle tally to your total tally, and some of these dictate whether you get experience points or not. Does that all make sense so far?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and obviously when it comes to experience points, because this was something I wanted to kind of clarify, because there are instances where tallies do accrue points. So most specifically, it's marked for death, right? Or sorry, marked for dealers of death, not marked for death. Dealers of death. A unit gains 1 experience point for every third enemy unit it has destroyed. So in that instance, the tally works, right? Because you're keeping a tally. It's not clear if this thing has killed 3 units in a game, or if that thing has killed 3 units over time. I don't know
if a total rather
so it's
than
a total.
It's not per battle.
Yeah,
but there are some agendas which we'll come to later, which is battle like mission specific, which
they're like secondaries to use grand tournament terminology, right? But yeah, no, let's not get into the EXP system just yet because it's going to come up. But yeah, that was in terms of the tallies, they definitely do gain EXP in that sense. Although there is a weird interaction that I wanted to talk to you about in a moment. But yeah. One of the interesting things I found, by the way, with the Crusade cards specifically was the Psyker stuff. I don't know if you were going to talk about that, but so Psykers, its Crusade card must make note of which psychic powers it knows. When you are generating that unit's power, you can ignore rules that state the unit must be part of a specific detachment in order to know that power, though all other requirements, such as having correct keywords, to apply. Now, I was trying to think of an example of a psychic power that was unlocked by being part of a specific detachment, and nothing massively came to mind, although I'm sure there's a really obvious one that someone's shouting at us about right now. But
I mean, they used to be stuff around Death Guard and Chaos, because taking the 2 detachments unlocked different psychic powers, but I don't know if that would really be the case in 9th edition. That's an oddly worded one, unless it is
odd,
because
it's good though.
I think it's like within this, you can't even use like the old special detachments from Vigilus, for example. So it wouldn't even be applying to that.
Yeah, it is strange. And that was where my head was at with it. It was like, okay, cool, specific detachments giving access to these abilities. I mean, again, it might just be a bit of a general thing just to deal with some very weird little edge cases. But it was one of those things that I thought was interesting because it was, again, one of those very specific stipulations that's very specific to the Crusade card rules.
Yeah. And the idea of the Crusade card is you kind of, as you said, you write everything down. So you write down your unit's war gear. It's like you can't then change that squad's war gear if you want to change weapon loadouts, unless you use, I think you can use some requisition points to do that for some units. It also has on it, it's got Crusade points. So Crusade points effectively represents the experience of the unit. So you could have, say, for example, I've been playing Crusade, I've done 10 games, I've got a really experienced army, all my units have leveled up in some way. So, and then you could be a brand new player to Crusade. We both end up, say, we're doing power level, so we're doing a 25 power level army. But yours are all bare bones in terms of they have no abilities and extras. But I, all of a sudden, have got units with loads of cool abilities on. So the Crusade points represents that extra experience in terms of a balancing mechanic. So we tally later on. You tally up the difference, and the person with the lesser amount gets the difference in CP as a way of balancing the game in that respect.
Well, half the difference rounding up.
Yeah. Sorry, that's all right.
But I was going to ask, right? When and how do I calculate Crusade points?
Unit Crusade points is a measure of how many upgrades and bonuses are accrued as part of your Crusade force. It will typically start at 0.
So it starts at 0, but then when does it go up?
When you go up a level in experience. So there are.
Well, no, because that's a different thing altogether. So that becomes. So when you go up in experience, your battle honor increases.
Yeah, so you have basically ranks, which are sort of levels of your experience.
Yeah, so please read through.
So you'll start off on 0, and as you go up and accrue X amount, you will become bloodied. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
We are.
So you start off as a battle readied, which is 0 to 5 experience. Once you hit 6 experience, you then become bloodied. That's your new rank. And as you go up into that new rank, that is when you will gain Crusade points. So under battle honors.
Well, no, but it doesn't say you gain Crusade points. It says you gain a battle honor. Yeah. So your battle honor becomes 1.
Yes, but then for each battle honor you gain, you increase your Crusade points. By 1 if you've got a power rating of 10 or less, and then 2 if 11 or more. So your battle honors are your kind of cool abilities that your unit gets, but obviously depending on the power level of that unit, you'll either go up in Crusade points by 1 or 2.
See, this is why we have these talky points, because I knew there was going to be a way of it. Bizarrely, I feel like I read that reference somewhere. It must have just not.
Sorry, that's under. Well, we'll get to it later. It's on the. Where's that page?
Oh, here it is. Yes, each time you've increased your Crusade points total by 1, if that.
Yep. So that's under page 318. If anyone is madly following along with us, under ranks and battle honors.
I mean, I hope someone's following along with us. I feel like you're specifically feel like kind of. Well, I'm all over the place with it, right?
Okay. Well, let's take it back to Crusade cards. So you can get your experience for your units, and there's several different ways of doing it. So one of them is battle experience. So at the end of each battle, each unit will gain 1 experience. Quite simple. Yes. As you said, there's dealers of death. So each time you kill the 3rd enemy unit, you will also gain an additional experience point. And then you've got marked for greatness. At the end of a battle, you can select 1 unit that was part of your army list, and they can just gain 3 experience off the bat. A bit like an MVP in Blood Bowl. Funny that.
A bit, yes.
But you do need to also keep a mark of how many marked for greatnesses a unit has had on it as well. So on your Crusade card sheet, and it is very exhaustive and in-depth, there's a bunch of different tallies for ticking stuff off. Sometimes it's in a mission, sometimes it's a running total. I hope that makes sense.
It does make absolute sense. So throughout the games, you are basically saying, did it take place in a battle? Did it take part in a battle? Yes. Did it happen to kill 3 things this game? Yes. Or did it kill 2 things in the last game and 1 thing in this game, thus resulting in 3?
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's other ways of leveling up later on, which is, as we said, it was the secret agendas.
Yes. Yeah. So there's those agendas, and then there's also, and then, there's some other bits and pieces. And then Mark for Greatness, you get free. Certain things can't gain experience, though. So named characters, swarms, drones, and unit fortifications can't gain experience, as would make sense, because if you're a named character, you've probably achieved as much as you can hope to do, or at least in some instances. And then obviously swarms are mindless swarms, and drones are little buddy robots, so you don't worry about those. Next on it is the combat tallies. So a unit's Crusade card contains space to record all kinds of battle statistics. Each time your unit takes part in a battle, survives a battle, or destroys an enemy unit, make a note of that. The unit's Crusade card. Units can earn experience points from these tallies, as described on page 335. And again, we can skip to that maybe at some point. Again, I need to quickly reference page 335.
So those combat tallies are the ones that I mentioned before, where you say enemy units destroyed with psychic power, ranged weapon, or melee weapon, and then you have up to 3 spaces for your agenda tallies, which are mission specific as well.
Yeah. So yeah, so essentially add one to the battle play tally for each unit the Crusade card took part in. If that unit was not destroyed at the end of battle, add one to its battle survive tally. And all during battle combat tallies you have accrued during the battle in total combat tallies on the unit's Crusade card. But surviving a battle doesn't instinctively grant you EXP, right, or experience, right? Like there are perks and like agendas where surviving a battle is a good thing, and obviously if you survive a battle, there are other positives that become available.
Yeah, you get your battle experience, which is your 1 XP for taking part, regardless of whether you survived or not. Although there is a chance that if you didn't survive, you've got to then do a roll to see if something negative happens.
But so the only tally that we can see thus far, and maybe there's something elsewhere, and maybe you know about this, so the only tally that will actually grant you experience is the Dealers of Death, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, okay, fine. So because again, it's sort of written in such a way as it alludes to the idea that down the line you're going to get experience for all these different, criteria, but in reality it's just the stuff you kill tally that counts. Right?
Yeah, I think it's because they are all stuff you kill, but and the nuance of whether it was ranged or melee or psychic, I don't think really matters. But it's just a fun thing to note about your units. Like, oh, cool!
Yeah.
Like, I've mostly killed people by shooting or by a combat. So I think those kind of statistics is quite interesting.
Indeed, everyone loves a nice statistic. When we're going to move on to the requisition points, which is going back to what I was saying previously. So requisition is essentially it's kind of like a non-replenishable, almost like mana source, I suppose, if you're going to talk about it in maybe like Magic the Gathering terms. Essentially you get 5 requisition points every game. And any requisition that you don't spend...
You start off with 5, and then you gain 1 every game, regardless of whether you've won or lost.
Oh, that's
and then there's a
Yes.
cap of 5. So weirdly, you start at the maximum. So you're encouraged, I guess, as you build your order of battle, because that's technical term, as you're creating that army roster, you've got 5 to spend straight away. You don't need to spend them all, but you can. And obviously, you're going to get 1 straight after your first battle, so you could just spend 1 and get 1 back. If you don't spend any at the very beginning, then after your first battle you're going to gain an extra 1 that goes to waste because you're at your cap already.
That was it. Yeah, so you're capped out at 5, you gain additional 1. Sorry, I was getting myself confused with another aspect of the system around there's something else that resets to 0 everything. I think it's the tallies and stuff on combat tallies, isn't it? I was getting myself all worked up. But yeah, so the idea of the requisition system is that, you gain these requisition points. You can never have more than 5 of them, and you spend them to do all sorts of things.
Yeah, it sort of says here that they're used to upgrade your Crusade force or units within them.
And where this becomes interesting with regards to what I was saying earlier is the point I was trying to raise around relics and warlord traits and other upgrades. No models in your order of battle can have a relic or a warlord trait unless you have purchased the appropriate requisition. This means your warlord does not automatically have a warlord trait. You do not automatically get to give a relic to one character in your army. You have to spend the requisition in order to get it. And it goes on to essentially say, in any instance where a stratagem would unlock a relic or would unlock a warlord trait, you still need to spend the requisition. But, and again, Phil, please correct me if I'm wrong, the requisition doesn't trump the stratagem. So when you muster your army and you're going to play, if you're going to use 2 characters and give them both relics by using a 1 CP stratagem and, this requisition system, you still have to spend the 1 CP in the game to use the stratagem, and the requisition has to be listed in your combat cards. Sound about right, Phil?
Well, my assumption is that you can't use those stratagems at all. You use the requisitions to give it a relic to your character. It then goes on its card, so then it permanently has access to that relic or warlord trait, for example. Because once you've got a warlord trait, you're stuck with it. So this is like you're buying a warlord trait for your character. It's not for that one mission. It is forever because it's on that Crusade card.
You know what, Phil? You don't have to make that assertion. It's written right here in the little box. Not usable unless you have purchased the appropriate requisition. Your warlord does not have a warlord trait. No models in your army has a relic. You cannot use stratagems that upgrade units before the battle. And then where it says it here, there are also several stratagems in codexes and other publications that can upgrade units before the battle. Examples include stratagems that enable additional models to have relics or warlord traits, or stratagems that grant units better characteristics or abilities. You cannot use any of these stratagems to upgrade any of the units in your order of battle unless you have purchased the appropriate requisition as described below. Oh, so you can. So I was right. You still need to. You can't use these stratagems unless you've paid for the requisition, which implies that the only way you can use these stratagems is if you've paid the requisition to gain access to it.
Yeah.
Right. So broadly, I was correct, but also there's some extra bits.
Yeah, and then again, it does say, as I said earlier, named characters always have a warlord trait, even if they're not your warlord, which makes sense.
That is a big plus. And then there's a bunch of stuff here about Imperial and Chaos Knights getting done over, basically.
They basically don't get the character keyword. And the Exalted and Tyrannical Court must be accessed by purchasing a requisition, and you can only give one model of character keyword, because I think those specific ones give character keywords to everyone.
Yeah, and I think it specifically says that you have the character keyword, but that doesn't mean you get the Warlord trait unless you pay for the requisition, blah, 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 blah. So, again, it's some very specific stipulations for the ways that Imperial and Chaos Knights work. Hopefully when their respective 9th edition books come along, they'll clean that up, right?
Yeah, they definitely have a ton. Well, every codex has a ton of Crusade special rules, so that will be answered in that.
Yeah.
If you go on to the next page, you get to see what the actual requisitions are. These are effectively, they're like stratagems for your army. So rather than using regular points, you're using your requisition points instead. So the first one, for example, is increase supply limit, costs you 1 requisition point, and it increases your Crusade's force supply limit by 5. So you start off at 50 power level, you then take it up to 55. So it's an easy way of increasing your roster size, in addition to the other ways that you might be able to do it.
Yeah, and then, I mean, beyond that, there is fresh recruits, which is purchase this requisition at any time. Select one unit from your order of battle that has a Crusade card. You cannot choose a unit that has achieved the battle-hardened, heroic, or legendary rank. Add any number of additional models to this unit and increase its power rating accordingly. If the unit you selected has achieved the bloodied rank, you must increase its Crusade points total by 1 if its power rating has gone from 10 or less to 11 or more.
Yeah, so that was my example about where you might have a squad of boys, but you want to add in more to them. There's rearm and resupply, which is allowing you to change war gear on a data sheet. There's repair and recuperate, which allows you to remove a battle scar, and battle scars are something that can happen later on if your unit was destroyed during a mission and you roll poorly. Psychic meditation, I believe, allows you to change 1 psychic power.
Yes.
The more interesting ones are the specialist reinforcements, the warlord trait, and the relic, because that is specific to how you gain access to the warlord traits and relics. So those ones might be worth actually reading through.
I mean, we can do. Well, we just read through some of the other ones. We may as well read through these, right? So, I mean, specialist reinforcements, purchase this requisition when you add a Crusade card for a unit to your order of battle. If there is a stratagem that would upgrade this unit to give it either a better characteristic profile and or abilities, you can use that stratagem to upgrade that unit for free, even if you would not normally have access to such a stratagem unless your army includes specific detachment. Make a note of any upgrades afforded by that stratagem on that unit's Crusade card. and add 1 to its Crusade points total for each command point that the stratagem would cost. So a +1 Crusade point if the stratagem would have cost 1 command point, a +2 Crusade point if it would have cost 2 command points, and so on. This upgrade is permanent and cannot be removed or changed. You cannot use this requisition to give a character a relic or warlord trait, and you cannot use a stratagem that upgraded the unit to be part of a specialist detachment.
Mm. So maybe all of the funny wording around detachments is with specialist detachments in mind.
Potentially, yeah. So, I mean, again, obviously, if you're looking at the pool of resources that is specialist attachments from the old Vigilus books and the like, I guess, yeah, you could go, I will be a siege breaker cohort, because fun times, or other, specialist detachments do exist. Or maybe that's a mechanic that they're going to be exploring more, because those weren't specialist detachments, were they? They were formations.
If you're talking about the 8th edition Vigilus ones, they were specialist detachments.
No, they were. Okay, sorry then, yeah.
Formations was 7th edition.
7th edition, yeah.
So the next one, Warlord traits and relics are sort of worded very similar, so I'll just go through the Warlord trait one. Purchase this requisition when you add a Crusade card for a character unit to your order of battle. So when you're very first starting out, this is probably something you're going to use. Once you add a character, you can give that character 1 warlord trait, even if it is not your warlord in battle. This character is only considered your warlord for purposes of this trait. This must still be a warlord trait that it can have. Any warlord can have the inspiring leader warlord trait, which, as we know from the Forge World books, is +1 to your leadership to units within 6 inches of this warlord. Alternatively, the warlord traits can be found in other publications, i.e. your codex. Make a note of the warlord trait on the Crusade card and add 1 to its Crusade points total, +2 if the character is Titanic. There's not many characters that are Titanic, but I guess knights might be in some fashion. The warlord trait is permanent to this unit, which is key. It cannot be removed or changed. No model can have more than 1 warlord trait, and the same warlord trait cannot be included more than once by any model in your order of battle. Makes sense.
So even though it wasn't spelled out that way in the prior rules, this particular requisition enables you to essentially do away with the stratagem, because if you were going to spend the stratagem, it wouldn't matter, because you wouldn't gain the warlord trait without using the warlord trait requisition, and then the requisition states that you don't need to use any stratagems or anything. So that is basically how that
it does away with all the pre-game stratagems, which in a way is good, because it actually frees up your CP to spend in the battle, and this is replacing all of those with, rather than command points, is RP, is resource points instead. I believe via the wording, because it says no more than 1 warlord trait, and the same warlord trait cannot be included more than once by any model in your battle. So you can have multiple characters with the same warlord trait, but you just can't have one character with the having 2 warlord traits, which doesn't seem like that would be possible anyway. Because you can only.
Sure, you read it that way. Hang on. No models can have more than 1 warlord trait, and the same warlord trait cannot be included more than once by any model in your order of battle.
Now, maybe that's poorly worded. Maybe it means you just can't repeat that warlord trait twice across 2 different units. But the fact that it says by any model almost implies by that one model.
But I think the order of battle reference clears that up by basically saying that it's 1 warlord trait, and that's it.
Yep.
You can't go, every one of my Blood Angels captains has Artisans of War to reference the old Artisans of War. I don't know what the new one does. It's not as good. I understand.
You've also got the relic one, which is very similar. So you can purchase it.
Just applies to relics, right? It's basically the same as the Warlord trait one, but replace Warlord trait with relic, right?
Yes, the only difference is, so it says this must still be a relic it can have. It cannot be a relic that replaces a weapon this character is equipped with if the weapon in question has been upgraded by a weapon enhancement, which is an upgrade you can give to your units later on, or a Crusade relic, which is a very specific weapon-based upgrade that you can give later on. And then make a note of it, add 1 Crusade points to your Crusade card, or +2 again if it's a Titanic unit. Again, it says it's a permanent upgrade, and no models can have more than 1 relic, and the same relic can't be included twice in your order of battle.
Yeah, no, indeed. Yeah, so, you know, requisition-wise, again, it's just a series of essentially resources and things that you can use to add some flavor to your army and start to kind of, you know, start to add those elements to it. It is a resource that you manage, and obviously you want to be spending it where possible to ensure that, you know, ultimately you don't end up in a situation where you're wasting resources and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean,
do you want to hear me say something negative about this?
Please, for the, you know,
you think I'm going to be Mr. Billy Positive in the room. I find it.
Well, that was sort of what we agreed beforehand.
No, I know.
You know, I'm supposed to be the bad cop, but please join me on the dark side.
What I find odd is you start with your maximum number off the bat. To me, it's like you should actually start with 0 or 1 and work them up, like make them earn it. I find it odd that the whole point, well, for me, it's like I want to start off with a small army, like fresh recruits almost, and then you've got to slowly work in these other things. Straight off the bat, I can give my warlord a warlord trait, and I can give him a relic, and then I can give a couple of other characters relics and warlord traits, so they're already quite experienced or sort of hardened characters. And it's like I'd rather not have that for the first few games, so when they when my warlord finally does get a warlord trait, it's like a real achievement.
Yeah, I do sort of agree with you. I think would be interesting as well, I suppose, if they'd given us options to be able to kind of like upgrade characters to get them up the ranks a bit, maybe to sort of showcase their you know, their abilities on that side of things. But you know, oh, hang on there. Yeah, so yeah, that unit Crusade card, you cannot choose the unit. So yeah, fresh recruits, purchases.
Yeah, because I guess, for example, the specialist reinforcements you could use to turn a captain into a chapter master, for example.
Yes, yeah. So you could do that, to be fair. But I mean, yeah, I think it's all right as it goes. I mean, look, as a rule set in and of itself for that particular requisition stuff, it addresses a number of points. I think, I mean, not to get too bogged down in it just yet, because we'll have our time to sort of reflect on all of this. But one of the things I'm seeing consistently with this rule set is there's it's very fractured in its delivery, is where I'm at with it. And we you know, it's very much like you definitely need to. I mean, I read this thing in its entirety yesterday, and even I am at a point where I'm forgetting things or not remembering certain things. There's a lot of layers to it. So it's stuff like that where it's like, oh yeah, the very specific requisition thing trumps the thing that they're talking about before. But it's just, yeah, there's certain, you know, certain
it's like
chance cards, as it were, to use Monopoly terminology, that come into the effect where it's like, oh yeah, you know, we said that. Well, no, here's the thing. And you're like, oh, now it makes sense. But like, it's a bit all over the place.
I guess requisitions is a bit of a complex one, because it's undoing one of the core mechanics of the game, which is where you spend CP to upgrade your army before the battle. Now, potentially, they could have done it those stratagems actually just do cost resource points, and they just clarify that resource points are also CP. So you're tying in the fundamentals of how Crusade works with the core mechanics of it. But I guess they know that most people probably won't play Crusade, or a lesser number will. So this is having to take the core rules and sort of undo a few things to, unstitch them and restitch them back in a slightly different way. So it is a bit complicated in terms of how some of these requisition point stratagems, for want of a better word, actually work.
Yeah. So yeah, once you get through all that, you get into the ranks and battle honors, and this is a bit of a complex, lengthy thing. And I think for the sake of, consistency, we probably don't want to get into insane levels of detail on this, because essentially this incorporates weapon enhancements, psychic fortitudes, battle traits, which are just broad upgrades to units based on their continuing growth. And, as they become more experienced, they gain more of these, battle traits that enhance their abilities. So, I mean,
and you've forgotten Crusade relics as well.
Sorry, and Crusade relics, which are additional things that you can give these guys.
So you can have basically your experience points kind of cap is 51 plus, because that's when you get your maximum of 4 battle honors, which is basically 4 upgrades per unit that you could potentially have. You start off with 0, and as I said earlier, once you hit 6, that's your first level of going up to from battle ready to bloodied. And you gain your first battle honor.
And then, so 6 to 15 is bloodied, 16 to 30 battle hardened, 31 to 50 is heroic, and 51 plus is legendary. And the battle honors are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 for legendary. In terms of battle honors, there are 4 types of battle honors: battle traits, weapon enhancements, psychic fortitudes, and yes, Crusade relics. Each time a unit gains a battle honor, increase its Crusade points by 1 if the unit has a power rating of 10 or less, 2 if the unit has a power rating of 11 or more. And basically there are battle traits, there are weapon enhancements, psychic fortitudes, and a bunch of generic relics. And this is where the 9th edition codexes come in, because specific codexes give you specific upgrades and specific things. But we're just going to stick to the stuff that's in the rulebook at the moment. I mean, battle traits are different depending on what type of unit you're talking about. So you've got character units, monster units, any other unit, and vehicles. I should have said vehicles before any other unit, obviously, but there we are. So there are 1 to 6 table. You have to roll on these 1 to 6 tables, right?
No, this is a bit of a weird. It says you can roll, but also... or choose the battle trait you think tells the best for narrative for your unit. In a way, I think rolling is more fun and more a game of chance.
Yes, but Phil, I want all the best powers. That is the most narrative.
Well, I mean, if you're doing, anyone can play it that way, and it's never going to be fun if that is the case. You do need to genuinely embrace the sort of narrative element where maybe you've modelled your tank commander to have like extra armor on it. So as soon as you can, you'll give it the improved shielding special rule, which makes sense if you've already done some modelling on your units. Which, because trying to do these little visual upgrades to a unit that's already built and painted is actually very difficult. So I can get why they've given you that choice. It's a bit like psychic powers, where it used to be random, but now it's random, but you can also choose. So everyone just chooses. Most people like that. I think when maybe less so when it comes to battle traits, because I think battle traits maybe you do want to pick, but I think for the battle scars it should be random, because why choose the best of the worst ones?
We'll get to those later, Phil. You accusing me earlier jumping around, right? Like me, dear oh dear. But yeah, so battle traits are what they are, right? So it's stuff like if you're a monster and somehow you rolled a 3, you'd get a thickened hide. Which would add 1 to your saving throws for monster models in this unit in the fight phase. If this unit made a charge move, was charged, or performed a heroic intervention this turn. So again, it's a little bit of extra stipulations around what unlocks that ability in that instance, which again is something we'll talk about later, but it certainly starts to get very confusing. Weapon enhancements are pretty obvious. It's ranged weapons and melee weapons, and again, 1 to 6 tables for both. And they give you advantages, based on the type of weapons they are.
Well, what's
So-
interesting with those is it's a D6, but also it says D3. So if you're a Titanic unit, you only get to do the D3. So the first three
yes.
weapon upgrades aren't as good, so to speak, as the higher ones. So therefore, you're kind of capping the Titanic unit's abilities to get access to really good upgrades.
Mm. And then Psychic Fortitudes, which is really weird because it is only a free ability table, but they've still referred to it as a D6 table.
Rather than D3, yeah.
Yeah, rather than D3. So 1 to 2 is Psychic Might, 3 to 4 is Adamantium Will, and 5 to 6 is Master of Law. Why they didn't just go D3 it, I don't know, but there you go.
Maybe they're trying to just do D6s where applicable, because halving a 5 is difficult in my brain. Yeah, so things like, for example, so we didn't really.
You're not halving a 5, are you?
No, I know. We didn't really talk about it for weapon enhancements, but it's basically things like +1 to the weapon's strength, increase the AP by 1, or add 1 to the weapon's damage characteristic. For the Psychic Fortitude, it's add 1 to the number of psychic powers this unit can attempt to manifest in your psychic phase, add 1 to the number of psychic powers this unit can attempt to deny in your opponent's psychic phase, or add 1 to the number of psychic powers the unit knows from one of the disciplines available, and write it down on their Crusade cards. That one could be quite useful, because obviously you're limited in a very permanent way normally by the kind of abilities and powers that you've got. The really interesting section is the Crusade relics.
Well, they do actually have some really fun stuff in here that you kind of like, and they have genuinely given up caring about making the Crusade system insanely balanced, because they've just gone, oh, here, have a super powerful thing.
There are some really powerful things in it. Well, this is the thing that sold me on Crusade, though, because it's got so many cool things that hark back to older editions. So let's just explain, first of all, that the Crusade relics can only be given to characters that gain a Crusade relic. So it's just one of the upgrades you can pick. You can have a character can have any number of Crusade relics, but the same Crusade relic cannot be included in your order of battle more than once. And a character can have codex relics even if it has other relics, say, for example, from a regular codex. But as mentioned above before, there's like a weird thing where you can't take a relic that upgrades a Crusade relic, for example, or a weapon that has been enhanced by your weapon enhancements. You've got the Artificer relics, which is any character can have an Artificer relic. You've also got Antiquity relics, and then you've got Legendary relics.
Which contains the Vortex Grenade.
Spoilers.
The Vortex Grenade. Are you going to read every one of these relics?
No,
I know you want to.
No, I was just going
it.
to read out the names of them, but not the rules.
Oh, okay, please. That is acceptable. I will agree to the names.
Fair enough. So the first one is Artificer weapon. Second one is Mastercrafted armor. +1 weapons.
Makes sense.
+1.
Good armor.
There's Laurels of Victory, this one's actually quite cool and sort of thematic. So if this model is included in your army, you receive 2 bonus command points to use in battle. However, if the model is destroyed during battle, you immediately lose 2 command points.
That makes sense.
Cool.
That's an interesting mechanic for sure.
One of my other favorite ones is the Conversion Field, which is a weapon of old, or not even a weapon, a sort of defensive device. Infantry only. This model has a 4+ invulnerable save. In addition, each time you make an unmodified 6 when making a saving throw, the closest enemy unit within 1 inches suffers 1 mortal wound.
Good old Conversion Fields.
Cool. I really like that. You've got Artisan Bionics, Friends on Injectors, and then we're on to the Antiquity Relics. Which is heroic character models or legendary character models can be given this. So these ones are specific to higher ranked characters. The Artificer ones anyone can take. You also add 1 to your Crusade points for each Antiquity Relic you have. In addition to the one you get for your battle honor. So your units kind of coolness and points cost via Crusade points costs a bit more. So the first one is Xenotech digital lasers. Then this one's quite cool. Blackstone shard amulets. This model can never be targeted or affected by psychic powers in any way, nor may it attempt to manifest any psychic powers or perform any psychic actions. Pretty cool.
I mean, certainly good if you're facing off against some, particular psychic entities. But yeah, I mean, again, situational but strong.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very good ability thing for what it is.
Then there's
I was reading it just a moment ago and thinking,
I like it. I think it's kind of a nice little theme. There's Archaeotech Nanomed. There's Dark Age Displacer Belt, which is a very cool one. Infantry only. Instead of making a normal move or falling back in your movement phase, this model can be removed from the battlefield and then set back up anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches away from enemy models. So you can properly zip around the board.
Yeah, you can blink all over the place. I was hoping to see the distortion field of old in here. The distortion field was one of my favorite old bits of Wargear, because it was like
you got shot, and if you made the save, you moved like 6 inches or something.
Yeah, so it used to be that when you got shot, you would basically scatter. So you'd get like a 4-up invuln save or a 3-up invuln save in second edition, but then your model would scatter. So it would, so the displacement field would basically move the model out of the way. So it would put you somewhere else. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I did love those kind of random.
The Vortex Grenade was another absolute classic from the editions of old. And the rules for this one is it's a grenade with a range of 6. Its strength, AP, and damage are all stars.
Yeah,
but it's grenade 1. And the ability, 1 use only, this weapon hits the target, suffers 3d3 mortal wounds, and you roll 1d6 for every other unit within 6 of that target unit. Roll before any destroyed models are removed on a 4+. That unit being rolled for suffers d3 mortal wounds as well.
Well, what's interesting is the range is only 6 inches, so you have a 50-50 chance of hitting yourself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so if you're throwing this, you're taking it, which I like, though. I like, again, not as interesting as when you used to place a template or an actual kind of like marker for the Vortex Grenade, and it stayed
on the board,
on the battlefield,
and it move around as well. It's like endless spells before endless spells.
It was so good, man, back in the day. And it used to have mad interactions if it hit like buildings and stuff. Like it used to be like, oh, I've moved into a scenery piece. It's been sucked into the warp.
As would be expected.
Or sometimes they'd have instances where the stuff would get flipped up into the air and then come crashing down again, and it was like, that's gone wrong.
So the Vortex Grenade is a legendary relic. So you got to have achieved the legendary rank to be able to take it, and it costs you 2 extra Crusade points. Well, it doesn't cost you; it gets added to your character. The odd one about Vortex Grenade is it says 1 use only. Now, is that once per battle, or is it like literally once for the entire campaign? Which sort of makes sense because that is what it would be.
Yeah, I mean, it should be. I mean, realistically, it should be 1 use only.
I assume that is what it means, but they haven't clarified.
I mean, 1 use only within the constructs of the game means once per battle, but then maybe there is actually specific wording that says once per battle. Now I can't remember.
Yeah, it might be that a normal thing would say use once per battle, and because this says use once only, it does literally mean once. And it is really powerful. 3d3 mortal wounds plus the chance to do another d3 mortal wounds to every unit within 6 inches is pretty powerful. So it makes sense that it is literally a one-off thing. So I really like that it's super powerful, but you've got to spend a lot of like resources to get it, and then you're only going to use it once.
I would have made it 3d6. Just go mad with it.
Well, I mean, why not?
Exactly. Just make it absolutely bonkers. It would have been amazing. And then you got Nullfield Disruptor, which is you ignore 4-up invuns.
You just ignore
all invuns in combat specifically.
Yeah, that's really cool. A bit like the old.
It is cool. Yeah,
Assassin.
I mean, this is where Crusade shines, because it gives the game designers the opportunity to, create interesting relics and interesting things that we wish were available in the game, in the normal game. I mean, theoretically, there's no reason why you couldn't agree to allow yourselves to gain access to some of these things, but obviously within the constraints of the game, it's not a possibility. which is a shame because there's some really interesting.
Yeah, obviously there's only 2 pages of these relics. I sort of wish there was more.
Every codex comes with more.
Yes, so it'd be really interesting to have a look through those now and see what, for example, Space Marines or Guard get when other codexes start to come out.
Exactly. The out of action test is something that I'm a little bit weirded out by, right? Because the out of action test is essentially, did the unit die in the game, and then did you as the controlling player roll a 1? And then if you've rolled a 1, you then have to get these battle scars, right?
Yeah, so as you said, if the unit was destroyed during the battle, roll a dice. On a roll of 1, you get to take one of 2 things. You get to have Devastating Blow, which means you lose D6 experience points, and you can't gain any experience points from that battle. Or you can take the Trade, which is a battle scar. So you can gain your experience points, you get to keep your experience points, but you basically get to have a negative trait for your units. So the battle scars, again, like the others, are split between character units, monster units, vehicle units, and any other units. They are a bit samey, despite them being split out on different tables. So, the first one is basically reduced movement. You get ones which is reduce your wounds characteristic by 1, maybe subtract 1 from your attacks characteristics. There's weapon damage. Select 1 weapon if it, equipped by a vehicle unit. If this unit has any ranged weapons, you must select one of them. If any of those are heavy, then you must select one of those. Subtract 1 from the hit and wound roll when resolving attacks with that weapon. So pretty devastating.
What's quite funny is that these don't go away, do they?
They can if you spend a requisition point to take the repair and recuperate. Which
That's it.
So that allows you to remove 1 or more battle scars from a Crusade card, and you reduce your Crusade points by 1. It goes up by 1. Here, I believe it says you roll on your table to determine, or you can actually, again, choose narratively if you want to pick one. I think if you're doing this with a gaming group, you should sort of maybe agree beforehand if you're all picking or all rolling, because I think maybe rolling is more fun because you don't get to control that element of a narrative.
But it's more fun to get what I want, Phil.
Well, exactly. But I like the fact that you get to choose between the Devastating Blow or the Battle Scar. So you can choose to go, I'm going to sacrifice the XP that I've gained to instead, or to take the Battle Scar. I think, it'd be interesting to see what people take. I think the Battle Scars add more interesting narratives elements to units. However, it is more stuff to remember in a game. It's extra mechanics of, this unit has this upgrade. I forgot it's actually, it's lost its leg, so it's got -1 movement. So it adds layers of complexity in terms of you've got to remember these additional rules that it has, which is why you need those.
Also, it's worth mentioning, like, you get the way the game is made, you can never use the same Crusade card again. But you can just get rid of that Crusade card and replace it with the exact same unit just back at level 0, right? Like, you could just literally go, back to level 0.
I'm not sure about how you remove units from the game.
There's a really interesting way that it's worded, which if you wanted to, you could definitely start to muck around with. But you can add new units to your order of battle anytime, as long as you don't go over your Crusade forces supply limit. But you cannot change that unit once you add it, or the number of models, equipment, none of it. They must stay the same. But you can remove units anytime. You cannot remove and then add back the same unit. But actually, it's not worded that way. It's the same combat card. So I can't remove Squad Dan and then put back a squad and say, this is Squad Dan. The only stipulation is that I have to then draft a new Crusade card with the exact same content. So I guess I just scrub out the name and change it to something else. So yeah, it's very sort of strangely written how it works, but it's the when they say, oh, you can change it any time, it'd be like, oh, what? So like mid-battle, I can be like, oh, well, I'll just get rid of that and I'll put this one in. Obviously, that's not going to work because that's not how mustering your army works. But it's interesting that you can get to points where you can kind of game the system where you're like, well, this unit is accrued way too much.
I think that's,
I'll just replace it.
Again, that's always been the case in Blood Bowl. Once you've got a character that's got a bunch of like negative modifiers on it due to injuries, you go, I'm going to retire this guy. Doesn't cost me anything to do. So I'm going to then hire a new guy. But the thing is, you've lost all your experience. You've lost any abilities
in this instance,
that it might have had.
Yeah. But in this instance, you immediately bank the power level.
Yes, yeah, because obviously the power level is based on like your supply limit in terms of what like the actual number of models you can add to your army. So it makes sense that you'll get that back, so you can replace it. So if you're replacing like a squad of guardsmen that's super experienced, but they've got a bunch of battle scars, I can go, I'm going to sack this off. I'm going to get rid of them, but then that frees me up with the same number of power level to get basically a generic brand new green squad of the exact same type, the exact same weapons, but they have lost all that experience and they've lost any weapons and equipment. So that is the trade-off. And I think because of the rest and recuperate sort of stratagem for requisitions, you're sort of encouraged to do that rather than just completely get rid of a squad and replace it with a brand new one.
I think, honestly, I would argue that you should probably customize the experience to basically suggest that ability to remove and add units needs to be adding units, fair enough, but removing units, I feel like that needs to be more linked to maybe like a voting system within the Crusade system or something like that. Like
costing you a requisition point, for example.
Yeah, costing you requisition, or maybe because the logic is if you spent requisition on them at some point, then you're losing that requisition, right? Because you've invested in it. So if you spent 2 requisition on this squad across however many games, that is 2 requisition points that you're losing by getting rid of them. But there is going to be certain like chaff units in people's armies that no one's ever going to focus on. Like, you know, if you're playing a Space Marine army, you're going to want to keep throwing upgrades at Terminators. You're going to keep wanting to throwing upgrades at, you know, other elite forces. But the tactical squads or the intercessors or the scout squads, you're like, whatever. You know, just keep replacing those. Whatever. No one cares if they're rubbish.
It's all down to the person. Someone might actually want to have an elite crack squad of scouts.
Oh, of course, like the Wolf Scouts from the Spaceballs and so on and so forth. But it's an interesting It's an interesting mechanic. The last and only real thing probably to talk about, other than the split units and summoning unit stuff, which is more about kind of whether these guys need Crusade cards or not, and how you deal with those, is selecting your Crusade army. So essentially, me and Phil meet for a game. We're both starting out Crusade. I've got 50 power level worth of stuff. He's got 50 power level worth of stuff. So we agreed to play a combat patrol game with 25 power level. And then we basically build our army out of that. However, somehow, some way, Phil has played a bunch of games before me, and his units have some Crusade points attributed to them, and mine do not. So I have 0 Crusade points, and Phil has 3. Well, then we halve the difference between the two of us, which is easy maths in this instance, because the difference between us is 3. So that then becomes 1.5, but then we round up. And that gives me 2 extra command points, right, Phil?
Ooh. Yes, no, that's exactly
it.
Which is interesting. It's like an okay mechanic. I get the impression it might not work under, you know, if you've got 10 extra command points and I'm tooled to the 9s, I don't think those 10 extra command points are going to help you out all that much. What I would like to see is this give you a bunch of specific stratagems to spend this CP on, like orbital bombardment or some other kind of cool shenanigans that your army can do, bringing in like an extra reserve unit, something that gives you the edge that is probably needed and not just give you extra CP. Now, some armies do have things like orbital bombardment, but I would like to see a bunch of generic ones in here that you could spend this CP on.
I like the description that the idea of the extra CPs is like, High Command is throwing extra resources at them to compensate for the difference, as if High Command care. It's like, oh, you're in trouble there, lads. Oh, well. Like, it was nice knowing you. Good luck out there. Yeah, look, I mean, here's the thing, right? We've gone over the rules, we've gone over the things, and as you said, Phil, I kind of laid my cards out on the table at the start. Truth be told, talking through it with you, there is definitely something about it that seems more interesting than where I was at with it previously. I had a lot of frustrations with it when reading it, and I think I will still have a lot of frustrations with it when trying to play it, and that's more to do with the fact that 40k as a game system at the moment is really complicated as it is, in my opinion. So adding this to the equation just feels like it's making the game more complicated. And I think the problem is how that nuance is kind of expressed, because within Blood Bowl, right, it's somewhat easy to keep on top of what 11 dudes on a pitch have, right? Like, it's easy for me to know that lineman number 3 relates to this stat card, and also there was a lot of like universal special rules or universal language within the game of Blood Bowl, right? Like, if I say to you that lineman number 3 has block and dodge, you know what that is, right? Like, it's not like I'm having to like go back and look at very sort of specific rules, whereas in this, all the stuff that I've got, especially when you start looking at what's in that Marine book, when you start looking at what's in the Necron book, it's all really, really army specific, and it's all very finessed. And I think that's one of the things that's weirded me out at the moment. It's like, it's a lot of extra stuff on top of what is already quite a lot of stuff. And that's my concern for it. It just feels super admin-y.
Well,
I don't know, where are you at with it?
think we've got to the end and we're doing a roundup, but we haven't, because we still need to talk about agendas and the missions.
Oh, yes, the agenda.
So this is the extra layers of stuff that you forgot about.
Okay, well, look, I mean, agendas and missions we can get on into a moment, but I don't think that necessarily impacts our
fair point.
Overview of the system, right? Because
yeah, no, I completely agree. I think you are right, and there is a level of difficulty where you've got 5 squads of guardsmen. They've all got to have a unique name, and you've got to individually know which squad is which in terms of keeping track of the tallies that each squad is doing in the game. So on one hand, that's quite good because it might encourage you to, do some, different color schemes, or to add some thematic elements to each of the units, so you know which one is which when you look at it. So for example, maybe you add like a banner bearer, just for squad recognition, for example, or different stripes on their shoulders, on their shoulder pads, for example, something like that. So it does encourage you to do that, but it's like you've got to do it out of necessity. As you said with Blood Bowl, like every single guy has a number on his back or on his shoulder pad to clearly identify which squad belongs to what. And with a small army, I think that's relatively straightforward. If every unit is unique and is a different data sheet, again, not a problem. But once you get to multiples of stuff, if I've got 3 different Lehman Russes plus 3 different tank commanders, that's a lot more mental admin I've got to make in terms of remembering what is what. If you had, maybe you need small tokens to represent each Crusade card, because the Crusade cards are big, they're not small. You can't just put them down next to a unit while you're playing. They're like an A4 sheet of paper.
Well, yeah. And it's like you're going to need like a binder when you turn up to games, right? Like, okay, fair enough, they're incorporating this into the app at some point. But right now, if I want to play a game of Crusade, I've literally got to turn up with a, with like a Filofax or something.
So as I mentioned before, there is a book that has it's like pages of the Crusade rosters, which would make it easier, although there's going to be some flicking back and forth. And it was a similar one because I used to have the book where I could keep track of each mission, and I could write down like my victory points and make notes about the battle and stuff, which was really useful. And they basically did a Crusade version of that. But yeah, even that's not ideal. Like personally, I'd like sort of small little cards, a bit like the ones they did for Kill Team, that I could just write on and then have on the table. Again, it's much more manageable at smaller sizes. So I think where Crusade might thrive is in those smaller games and not necessarily the kind of 2,000 point sort of style armies, because there's a lot of bookkeeping involved.
But does that feel then like the ultimate expression of the game if you're ultimately being restricted to smaller games? Does it feel to you like the system works best on smaller games, so as it sort of doesn't necessarily encourage you to build up to those bigger games, or is the logic that over time you're supposed to build an affinity with these units and you inherently know that one's got the inability to respond to auras because of the results of battle 126 that happened 6 months ago or whatever, like, is that the idea? Or
I think that's quite likely the case. If you are just going to do Crusade, like you and your mates or whoever else you play, you always say, I'm just doing Crusade with this one army, then you will get that kind of mastery of remembering what extra rules each unit has.
Because And this was, I suppose, where it became interesting for me, because one of the sort of USPs that was used in the marketing of Crusade was the idea that you could use Crusade all the time. Like, I could turn up to a game with you and use my Crusade force, and we could just be playing a GT mission pack game, and I could still use my Crusade force, and that would accrue Crusade points. But then that doesn't make any sense when you actually read these rules, because all of a sudden I'm turning up to you, Phil, and going, oh yeah, so that guy's got that warlord trait, and that guy's got that warlord trait, and that guy's a dreadnought, and this is a thing, and you're going to go, right, and how many points is this? It's like, well, it's 2,000 points. It's like, yeah, but like you've got like hundreds of warlord traits or like all this other stuff. Yeah, because I've played loads of games. It's like, okay, but now, right, hang on. So we're playing at this, and you've got all this, and what? And it's like, oh yeah, and I didn't have to spend any CP because I spent requisition 6 months ago. It's like it just didn't. The problem I've got with the Crusade system is it's not as advertised. It's like I can't turn up with my, say I only play Crusade for the next 2 years, and I turn up to a game event or anything, not an event, but just a friendly game. And I go, I'm going to use my Crusade force. And it's like, I don't want you to use your Crusade force. Your Crusade force is gnarly because you've played X many games. But that was something that GW sort of said about the system. The system was designed so as you could use it without being part of a campaign system.
I'm sure you could. I think a lot of people might be like, why would I agree to that? Like, if
I wouldn't.
Well, I know, but maybe if you want a challenge, if you're prepping for GT Heat, it's like
so I want to come up.
Imagine me with my narrative army that's been playing Crusade is having to play a GT mission rather than one of the Crusade missions. It's like, yeah, I might have an advantage if I was to tally up all my points rather than via power level because I've got more experience. But at the same time, I might have a bunch of battle scars, which might balance it out.
Oh, yes,
potentially, you would still have to go, okay, you still do the blessings. So it's like, I've got 12, Crusade points or whatever it might be, and you have 0. So therefore you've instantly in this game got 6 extra CP to balance it out. But you might go, but I don't want that because I'm practicing for a GT and I wouldn't get that in a GT. So it's but then you would have to make your decision of, do you want a bit of an uphill battle, in which case it might be, even though what you're facing is an army you would never see on in a tournament, but it would give you an interesting challenge and a sort of something to actually try and defeat.
But do you think it works in so much as, would you accept if you were now playing Crusade in your local game club and someone rocked up having just logged 50 games at home with his brother, and he turns up going, yeah, I've got a Crusade force, and then all of a sudden you're like, right, okay, cool, but you are a way away from everyone else now. Like, can you keep, basically, is Crusade a system that does what Games Workshop said it was going to do, which is allow people to go away and accrue these Crusade points outside of, structured narrative Crusade, campaign gaming? And will that facilitate that? Or is that just a lie? And really the only way it works is if you actually do an organized campaign system.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I think the balancing mechanic seems okay, but it probably doesn't cater for all scenarios and might need tweaking. I like the idea that I could just rock up and play someone who's done a bunch of games and is much more experienced than me, but I've got the offset. Whether that actually really works, I don't know, because we've not played it, but in principle it should, but it might not. And I think though it might be, despite whether that is how people will or won't play Crusade, the idea that you and your mates can go, we're going to do 4 or 5 games over a weekend, we're going to do Crusade start to finish, we're going to do a bunch of different missions. Over those 4 or 5 games, we're going to kind of level up our armies. And then either we can then park those armies for the next time you do a campaign and carry on with those armies, or we can go, cool, that was that army. It's now done. That was a cool story to tell. Now we can just move on. And next time we do a different Crusade, we do different armies, different setting. It's like saying we're going to do Badab War, followed by Siege of Rax with the same armies, and the same Crusade army has gone from one to the other. You might go, well, that's just silly. Of course they haven't. But you could at the same time. It's all down to your group, I think, and what your style is and what your jam is going to be all about.
Yeah, look, I don't mind a Crusade system. I don't mind a campaign system. Just Crusade, it doesn't tick the boxes for me quite right. It's very weirdly put together, and it is also very specific in how it's approached it. And look, I understand. Look, Games Workshop cannot create a system that works for everyone, but I feel like this is not what people really wanted from their narrative system. I think what the narrative gaming community want majoritively is tools with which to tell stories, and this enables you to kind of create a heritage or a history for your units, but it doesn't necessarily create stories in and of itself. And I think
it tells the story of your army. It doesn't tell the story of the mission that you're playing. Now we can go into the missions at some point, but the missions are pretty good for narrative elements, but they're not.
Hands up, the missions. I like the missions. I like a lot of the missions.
There's some really
because
good
a
ones
lot of
in
these
there.
missions are essentially the Eternal War missions from old chapter approved.
Yeah. There's some classic ones in there, but there's some other good ones in there, and they do have narrative hooks. Now,
but can I just say, on the agenda system,
is it too much like secondaries?
I mean, the agendas are essentially all the same in so much as they're purge the enemy, no mercy, no respite, battlefield supremacy, shadow operative, and warpcraft. There's a bunch of very, very specific agendas that are almost identical, except they're not, to the secondaries that you will be familiar with from the GT mission packs.
The difference that I like about these is these do not impact on you winning the game. These impact on your units gaining experience. So you might be going out of your way. So, for example, shadow operations, secure the area, keep a tally each time a unit has secured the area. So it's an action. One infantry unit can perform it at the start of can start to perform it at the end of the movement phase. You've got to be within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, and you complete it at the end of your turn. And each unit gains a number of experience points equal to their secure the area tally. So my unit is doing nothing for a turn to gain 1 experience point. I could do 3 turns of doing nothing to get 3 experience points. That is 3 turns where it's not actually winning the game. It's not taking part in the overall objective. So I like that trade-off, that these things, they're just happening in the sidelines. You're not going out of you might you can go out of your way to do them, and some of them you do with the actions, but some of them you might go, cool, you've got lots of characters, I'm going to take assassinate, so each time I kill a character I'm getting 2 extra XP for that unit, and that can just go on any unit that manages to kill your characters.
Yeah, and look, I think for me, stuff like the assassinate one isn't too egregious because it does require some interaction between you and your opponent. But a lot of this I would describe as the sound of one hand clapping, because it's just literally like, okay, cool. The game is irrelevant at this point when my agendas are, I'm going to stand here and do nothing, because it just becomes a case of, the game is just a vessel for me to then gain experience, to then bank on future games. And it just becomes like, I don't know, it just becomes like one of those like World of Warcraft gold farming guilds where the whole thing is just, I'm just here for the EXP.
I sort of see your attitude, but at the same time, you're meant to be embracing the attitude. It's like that squad is securing the area, or it's searching for Archaeotech, which is the other ones. Yeah. Or one of them's deploying Vox relays. So there's some really cool actions, and you could just arbitrarily go, yes, I'm doing this to get XP, but you sort of need to embrace the concept of actually they're doing something on the battlefield. Like they're actually searching and digging for clues, and they're doing something else. And it's, yes, you get experience for that.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the thing that's missing, right? In everything that they've done with this is like, what's the hook? What's the narrative? What's the reason? Like, because, look, I mean, let's do the missions and then we can really close this off, right? So you've got combat patrol missions, incursion missions, and you've got strike force missions. We really shouldn't have to go through every single one of these missions because there are a lot of them, and I think by that point people are going to really lose interest. Also, you go as far as onslaught missions. I mean, yeah, wow. Let's just pick a couple and kind of talk through them. I reckon most people early doors are going to end up playing combat squad, so we probably combat patrol. Yeah. So we probably need to address at least one.
Let's look at the assassinate one, because that's sort of a more interesting one of the two. I think the other two are slightly more generic. Oh, actually, the supply drop's a good one. I mean,
yeah, but assassinate's an interesting one to go for. So it's a combat patrol mission, and the mission briefing is: an army without a commander is helpless. A beast ready for slaughter. And the mission rules are: target sighted. The defender's warlord must be set up wholly within 6 horizontally of the center of the deployment zone, as shown below. This unit cannot be set up in strategic reserves, nor can it use any rules that allows it to set up elsewhere, wherever elsewhere on the battlefield or on a location other than the battlefield.
Yeah, so they have defenders and attackers in all of these maps, and unlike GT Pack, defender and attacker actually mean something. They're not symmetrical battlefields. Whether you're an attacker or defender often gives you different objectives. So you're playing asymmetrical battles on asymmetrical deployments, which makes it kind of really interesting. So the defender's deployment zone goes up halfway up the board. And then 10 inches away from that is the attacker's deployment zone. And inside the center of the defender, there's a 6-inch bubble where the warlord must start off.
Yeah. And that's interesting, right? Because, again, already that's a much more intriguing, creative decision. Because if you're playing on... I can't remember what the recommended board size is for Combat Patrol, but if you're playing on... hang on. Where does it say the?
It'll be a third of the normal size, if I recall.
Okay. Do you want to do the maths on that?
No.
No. Just a third, whatever that is. It's a third of it.
Sorry. Here it is. It's 44 by 30, as opposed to 44 by 60. Oh, so the combat patrol and incursion are the same size. 44 by 60. So 44 by 30. So it's half.
So you're going to be at the 22-inch mark. So your deployment zone as the defender is 22 inches, and your opponent's deployment zone is 12 inches as the attacker. And there's a 10-inch distance between your deployment zone as the defender and the attackers. And then your model has to basically sit at the 11-inch mark. So 11 inches horizontally, and then the other variable in this, I guess, would be depth as opposed to verticality, because it's not going up as it is going across. But the point is that with a 22 by 30, it'd be like 11-15 or whatever it is. But you sit somewhere in the center of that. But you've still got a good breadth of battlefield where you can start to deploy defenders, essentially. So you can essentially put barricades in the way, or essentially models that prevent your warlord from becoming an easy target, I suppose. So yeah, theoretically, the distance between your enemy and your warlord should be what, 23 inches?
Yeah, something like that. But also your warlord gets an extra perk called restoratives. Yes. So if defender's warlord has 10 or less wounds, then you get access to the restoratives, which basically gives you a 6-up feel no pain, or 6-up shrug, as we like to call it now. In addition, if you get access to restoratives and you've lost a wound, you regain 1 lost wound at the start of your turn. The first turn gets to choose the attacker gets the first turn in this mission, and then you've got different objectives. So there's 2 types of objectives. There's end of game and there's progressive, and progressive happen during battle rounds and are kind of accumulative during the course of the battle. So the first one is target wounded. The attacker scores 10 victory points at the end of a battle round. So not end of turn, end of battle round, if the enemy warlord lost any wounds during that battle round. And then there's target eliminated, which is an end game one. If a defender's warlord is destroyed at the end of a battle, the attacker scores 40 victory points. You've also got no meek prey. So this is for the defender. This is a progressive one. The defender scores 10 victory points at the end of the battle if the warlord destroys any enemy units during that battle round. And then the last one is bloody but unbowed. If a defender's warlord is not destroyed by the end of the battle, the defender scores 50 victory points. So
it's a lot of victory points getting thrown around, but it is at least some interesting kind of easy to follow mission specific objectives that players don't get to aggressively influence. I suppose,
and then you also get a victory bonus specifically for the winner of the battle. So this one says the victor can select 1 unit from their army that has a Crusade card. This must be a unit that can gain battle honors. That unit can take a battle trait of your choice and make a note on the card and increase its points accordingly. So each mission has a different objectives and different kind of bonuses, which impacts how your army might be growing. So this has got a really cool theme to it. But it is a standalone mission. Like if you're doing assassinate, would you do? You could say this is your first ever campaign, first mission. You're doing assassinate, and you can make that work. You're sneaking behind enemy lines. You're trying to cut off the head of the enemy before they get too powerful. And you could potentially tie that into later missions if you end up playing that same opponent again. But in and of itself, you go, there's a narrative story of I'm assassinating someone, but that could be all it is. And maybe some people just want that. And other people go, oh no, but I want other stuff to happen during the mission and other things like that.
Yeah. To suggest that mission is narrative is not accurate. It's just a mission type, but you can inject a narrative into it if you are able to layer that on top because of, contributions from your gaming group and things of that nature. But again, that's where the flavor starts to come in, and that's where the stuff gets interesting. Look, there's loads and loads of other ones to go through. I'm sort of conscious of how much of this we really want to talk about, but Crusade mission Strike Force Narrow the Search could be interesting because it is a classic from Chapter Approves of Old, because it involves the ever favored stipulation of a null field. So mission rules, objective markers. The players alternate placing 4 objective markers on the battlefield, one at a time, starting with the attacker. Objective markers being placed anywhere on the battlefield. There's more than 6 away from any battlefield edge and more than 12 from any other objective marker. Search area. At the start of the first battle round, the search area is defined by a circle 18 inches in radius, centered in the center of the battlefield. At the start of each battle round thereafter, the size of the search area radius shrinks by 3, so it has a radius of 15 in the second battle round, a radius of 12 in the third battle round, and so on. And then there is the null field, previously referred to as the null zone, but now the invulnerable saving throws cannot be made for units that are in 12 of the center of the battlefield. So again, you'll remember this if you were playing around 2019 in 8th edition. Then you've got the mission objectives, which has taken hold. At the end of each player's command phase, the players whose turn it is scores 5 victory points for each of the following conditions they satisfy for a maximum of 15 victory points. They control 1 or more objective markers. They control 2 or more objective markers. They control more objective markers than their opponents control, which, as you'll remember, is very similar to what you would experience if you were playing a GT mission. This mission objective cannot be scored in the first battle round. And then beyond then, you've got the progressive mission of zeroing in at the end of the battle. At the end of each player's command phase, the players whose turn it is scores 15 victory points if they control the search area. A player controls the search area if they have more models within it than their opponent. For the purposes of this mission objective, each vehicle or monster unit counts as 5 other models, and each Titanic unit counts as 10 models. Note that the search area is not an objective marker, so rules such as objective secured do not apply when determining which player controls the search area.
Ooh.
That would have been super useful 2 years ago, wouldn't it?
That's a game changer. Well, I like the fact that here vehicles and monsters count as 5 models each. I sort of wish that was just a generic rule across the board.
I agree.
But I like it here, and I like the fact that they've gotten rid of the obsec as well, which is really cool. And if I remember rightly, the old one, did you have other objectives, or did you just have one objective in the center of the board?
You just had to control the center. The secondary objectives were first strike, line breaker, and slay the warlord.
So I like that you get 4 objective markers plus this additional thing about controlling the center, and they haven't just said it's an objective, they've called it search area, so they're giving you an option to be like, you could go, we're going to play this mission, there's going to be a crash site right in the middle, and we're going to be searching the area for debris. Like, that is the narrative element of this story.
I mean, and this is the thing, I like the missions because I think they've just got more flavor to them, and I think they're just better than what the GT system offers. But you've heard my opinions on the GT system and how rigid it is in terms of gameplay. You're never going to hear me complaining about experimenting with and trying out missions like the ones outlined in this book. And, obviously forgive us for not necessarily feeling like it's right for us to go through and talk through every one. There's a lot of them. Obviously, if there's a real outcry from the community for us to go through it in that level of detail, we would obviously be happy to do so. But I think for today, that gives you a good flavor on Crusade and gives you a good idea of what it does out of the box. Will I be clambering over myself to play Crusade anytime soon? Because Phil's my buddy and I love playing games with him, I'll play Crusade if that's what he wants to play. But personally, I can't see myself getting invested in all that admin. It's too much for me, man. It's like the idea that I've got to create these lists and then maintain all of this paperwork and carry it around with me and, reference all this stuff. As I said from the outset, I love a narrative game. I love the theme of narrative. But for me, I think narrative is more about the setting. And what I would like to see is systems that, as I said from the outset, incorporate more of a kind of D&D dungeon master mechanic. Like, that's a campaign that I would love. I would love to have a campaign where someone was elected, the dungeon master or the campaign master, and every week they essentially looked at the pool of players that were participating and maybe using this as a framework, maybe using Crusade as a framework, they outlined interesting kind of narrative reasons for things to be happening within a broader backdrop, which broadly speaking has been what a lot of these campaign systems have been historically. I understand why Games Workshop feel like they needed to offer us something that was a catch-all, but I just think it's overly complicated, and I just don't feel like it really gives narrative players what it wants. And where it feels most egregious is in those campaign/Crusade books that they've released thus far, noting that I do not own it, but that Necron book didn't really seem to have any flavor or any fluff or any sense of place to it. It was just yet more layers of admin. And that's my vibe on it. It's admin heavy, and I feel like we could do without that.
Yeah, I mean, regarding Beyond the Veil book, I watched like a review of it earlier as a bit of prep, and actually Guerrilla Miniature Wargaming, Guerrilla Miniature Gaming. They seem to highly recommend it. They seem it looked like it was a good framework, and as you say, it is the campaign. The Crusade system is like a framework to do other stuff in it. It isn't out the box a narrative like be all and end all. It is a really good mechanical system for tracking an army as it gets better and it gets bigger, and that's sort of how you're meant to use it. It is a bit of, is a lot of work involved in kind of bookkeeping, and that's the thing that I don't like a lot of the ITC stuff is the secondaries and the bookkeeping during the mission. It's like this arguably has more. But you are just going, okay, I've killed a unit, tick, and that's it. I've done an agenda with this unit, tick. It should be relatively straightforward, but that is in addition to, the mission objectives, the progressive and end of game stuff, and the agendas. So there is a lot of stuff going on. And is that getting in the way of the story that you're maybe gonna tell? I don't know. I mean, on one hand, it's like potentially, if someone is a really narrative gamer and they don't need this, then they won't be using it. But I think as someone, for a lot of people, they're like, I want to do narrative gaming, but I don't know where to start. I think this is the perfect place to pick it up. It's not necessarily the easiest, but it's a great way of kicking off that narrative, the narrative juices in terms of working out how you come up with a narrative game. I think the downside of the book of the Crusade system is it doesn't really explore that any further, and I kind of hope that these campaign books do. So the Beyond the Veil is all set in the Pariah Nexus, so there's loads of specific rules all about the fact that it's like a pariah, that it's like a sort of psychic dead zone, and that is themed to a particular war zone. So I like the fact that you could do Crusade and go, okay, we're going to do a bunch of games in the Pariah Nexus. There's a bunch of cool relics specific to that you can get in that war zone, and there's a bunch of cool abilities or warlord traits or battle scars that you can pick up themed to that war zone. And then you could go, cool, I'm then going to go off and we're going to go to another war zone. But I've still kept all those relics and those other traits that I picked up along the way. But whether that actually really tells an overarching campaign story, I don't think it does. But then that's sort of something down to the players to create if they want it. Because quite often people just want a reason for being in the battle that they're fighting. And they don't want necessarily the narrative to get in the way of the actual gaming. They want it to be sort of added on top, and it's telling the stories in between the missions, which this does to an extent with the battle scars and the kind of the XP experience of your units.
Yeah. I mean, is it fair to say that it would be incredibly difficult, potentially impossible, to create an adaptable campaign system that works out of the box, right? Like, I mean, you are not going to get a compelling narrative campaign system without at least one or two people involved in it doing a lot of work. I mean, is that fair to say?
It depends what you want, though. I mean, this, while not maybe considered narrative, does give you something without anyone doing work. And as you were saying about the whole DM dungeon master, it's like the reason why that doesn't happen is one person has to basically say, I'm not taking part in this campaign because I'm going to manage everyone else, which some people enjoy that and find it fun, but other people don't. Most people just want to play the game as well.
I don't think it's impossible to, as a kind of, dungeon master type role, to not, be actively involved in the campaign. I think you can absolutely. I mean, potentially you play a certain force that is maybe an aggravator in the region. Maybe you play Drakari because they're doing raids that impact and affect the overall kind of sensibilities. Maybe there's a certain narrative thread that you can kind of explore there as a player. Maybe you occupy some unaligned units so as you can insert yourself into other games. Maybe you just play a generic force and you're just trusted to have a certain level of non-biasedness or whatever towards your own stuff. And ultimately the guy that the group has put faith in you to kind of manage this stuff efficiently, and they trust your judgment, and they feel like you're going to be a fair adjudicator even though you are actively involved.
Yeah.
I mean, for the good of the game, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that there's a few elements that this could have that would do what sort of a GM could do, or just guiding a GM. And it's like, there's agendas, but they're very mission specific. It'd be cool to have an army agenda that when you start your crusade, you give a story arc to your army. You go, my agenda is to kill orcs, or it's to, to do something, to collect ancient relics or archaeotech, or, then that can be an overriding thing that you could do as your your army progresses in size and experience. I mean, maybe that's something that's going to be added on. So, we talked briefly about Beyond the Veil, the campaign books, but there's also in White Dwarf magazines, there's the flashpoints, which again are sort of specific to, this is an area, this is a specific war zone, here's a couple of missions specific, and there is relics and crusade bonuses. I haven't properly looked at that yet, and I'd quite like to see how they play out. But I think it's that kind of structure that I think the flashpoints might give us that we want from Crusade, which is sort of, we need a setting. And this is the thing that Crusade doesn't say. So you basically like pick a war zone. This is the setting for your campaign. Pick some overarching agendas for each army, like the goals that they want to achieve over the course of this campaign. And then when you're playing these battles, theme it beyond just the mission, or take the mission and make sure you themed the terrain, make sure you're incorporating all of these things. But that is very much specific to, we're doing a campaign, like with a bunch of mates. Yeah. It's not, Crusade is meant to be, you're sort of getting a narrative element, but I can play with you, I can play with a bunch of other people, and it doesn't matter whether it succeeds properly in doing what it's trying to do. Whereas if it lent more into we're doing a campaign weekend, how can we go about that? And they can create more resources to achieve that. I think that'd be quite good.
Yeah. Again, for me, it doesn't really speak to what I want as a player at this moment in time. I definitely won't be doing this unless we are doing it as a gaming group. And then you're just going to have me begrudgingly doing it because it just feels like a lot of extra effort. And I feel like there's better systems to try and acknowledge and achieve similar, if not potentially better results. But regardless of that, I think, it was an interesting thing to read. It's been long overdue. I think it's one of the most poorly understood and poorly explored aspects of this rule set. And it's not without its charms. I can't sit here and tell you that I think it's bad. If it were up to me, I would tell the rules writers to go away and come up with a better way of expressing a lot of these ideas, because the way that rule set is written is bad. It is very, very wordy, and it is all over the place. It is not a well-structured rule set. And I do think as well, moving forwards, that they definitely need to try and establish some universal special rules or universal languages around rules that are being given to things, because at the moment there's just a lot of variables. And again, in Blood Bowl, I understand a large percentage of the stuff that you're going to give your players. Like if you turn around to me and go, oh, this guy's got the right stuff, I might start to go, hang on, is that the thing where you throw a teammate or whatever? And, you know what I mean? Like, I know what that is as an example, because otherwise it would have been potentially a bad example. But, you know, when you start saying, oh, this one's got a claw, I'll be like, okay, is that helping blocking, or is that something that helps catching? You know what I mean? Like in Blood Bowl, the majority of the more commonly used abilities and the greater majority of abilities, because they have those common terms, it's broadly understood. But I think the problem is with this is we don't have that kind of, you know, categorization, and I think that creates complexity.
Well, yeah, but I think that's, you know, the way things go with the data sheets anyway. It's like there's a million and one ways to say deep strike without actually saying deep strike, or feel no pain, or whatever it might be, because they want to give each one a unique taste to that specific army. Now, you know, you go through the battle scars, it's like, yeah, they do all have a title, so that, you know, out of those 6 things, there is a common term that you could write down on your data sheet that if you played it enough, maybe you could say to your opponent, oh, they've lost their leg. And you go, cool, I know what that is. It's -2 movement. Brilliant. But as you say, when you get into the specific nitty gritty of the codexes, then I imagine it will be all over the shop, because, and it kind of has to be, because it's themed to that army. So it can't be, you know, you don't want the Space Marine relics or the Space Marine upgrades to be exactly the same as the Necron ones, but just with a different name on it. That would be pointless. So it's sort of the downside of the more narrative and the more diverse the range of rules and abilities are, that you lose those kind of standardized naming conventions. And I guess that's sort of why you have the Crusade cards. I think the downside of the Crusade is this reliance on these Crusade cards, and a lot of kind of paperwork potentially when you're doing a game. Like, I don't think that it doesn't seem fun. It feels like bookkeeping, which isn't fun. Now, it might be quite straightforward if you could condense it down to small cards. Brilliant. If it's on an app and it's all done automatically through an app, that would be fantastic. But that still might be a bit convoluted. Like if you've got a battle roster and you've got to find the 5th infantry squads to give an upgrade to. I think the fundamental flaw is down to, if you've got lots of multiples of stuff, recognizing how those units are different and what abilities they have is, you know, there's one thing I did with Blood Bowl is I magnetized all my bases, and I had little tokens on each base to represent a skill. So I'd have a skull for mighty blow. I had a foot, like a boot, to represent sure feet. For example. So you could do something like that with your characters, not necessarily modeling stuff on their base, but just tokens, as you say, that are a bit generic, that you know what they represent, that you could have next to your miniatures as you're gaming, as opposed to having them just on the data sheet. Or you do what I think they did, I'm trying to think which gaming system it was. Might have been something like
Kill Team,
either Kill Team, or even I would say for some reason Blackstone Fortress, where it's like I've got a card and I've given it a #1, and then I've given this unit a #1 token next to it. Or X-Wing even has something like that, where you just assign a number to your card. Yeah, maybe it's X-Wing. So that way you go, cool, this tank has these abilities, this other tank has this other abilities, because I've clearly denoted 1, 2, 3. And I put that also on my roster. But you need a lot of space, like a sideboard, for all of these cards, or however you're doing it. I think it's that kind of faffing around which could make or break this system. I think the fundamental rules of your units gain experience and they gain abilities and cool relics, and I like the way that you could upgrade weapons and stuff for your squads. I think that's all fantastic. It's telling a narrative in a very like micro way to do with the individual units. It's not telling the macro story of your army or what is happening in a campaign, because it's designed to not be a campaign with that kind of overriding story. It's just the story of your army as it progresses and gets better.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, mate. And I think look, it's difficult for me to hate anything associated with 40k because I just love 40k and it's always in all of its forms, really. And even some of the stuff I dislike about it, I'm happy to put up with in some way, shape, or form, because it's just fun to play games and to try different things and the rest of it. And there's a lot of stuff I like about this. I just think I just think the way that they've layered it on top of already existing layers, it just becomes one of those things where it's like, wow, this is thick. Like this is a thick milkshake 40k. Normally, once you add Crusade, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
And look, no word to lie, I've got like 6 pages of notes here of points that I raised throughout and things that I observed and things that I questioned when it was first delivered to me as information and then later kind of clarified. And, you know, it's just, I just think they really need to dumb it down or just there has to be a better way of expressing this than this. But maybe there isn't. Maybe it just is what it is. If you want to do a campaign system, there's going to be admin.
Yeah, I mean, if they could have, because what you have is you've got like an army roster, which is your battle order, and then each unit has its own roster, which is its Crusade card. Now, if you could have one A4 sheet of paper that had every unit listed on it, just like its name, and then to the side of that was all these boxes and tick boxes and points that you could keep track of what that unit is doing, a bit like a Blood Bowl roster of old, where it was just all on one sheet. If you could condense all that information down on one sheet, it'd be super easy to kind of do that kind of admin. But because they've gone quite granular in terms of the detail that each unit can do, maybe they went sort of too far in that way. So it's like lots of bookkeeping and lots of data cards, Crusade cards. I like that it's a choice. Like it's not forced on anyone. It's like there's still open play as well. And I think the open play cards are definitely something we should look at some point, because I think there's even a lot of narrative just in those, in terms of like the twists and the missions and, you know, that sort of style of gaming. But I like that this is here, and I like that they're still supporting it. I like it that there's the campaign books. It's like I do want to get one of them just to see if they're any good. I really want to read the flashpoints from White Dwarf, because that seems to be something they're doing a lot of. And that also has like match play and campaign rules to it. So I like that is adding to the Crusade. Sorry, not campaign rules, Crusade rules. So I like that it's still being supported, but they don't really shout about it. They don't really promote it on the like Warcom pages. It's mostly they talk about match play, tournaments, and then they kind of forget about the other ways to play.
I don't think it's that they forget about them. It's just what you say about them. I mean, it's just a self-contained thing that people are doing. And also, any true kind of narrative gamer isn't going to use this stuff as written 100%, right? Like that's the thing. It's like most of the narrative players have long since accepted that what GW has presented them with is frameworks that they can then create their own gameplay experiences in. And that's the thing. The way I tried to tackle this, the way I tried to approach it, is to address the rules as they are written and to try and use the system as it was advertised and as it is intended based on the rules given within the pages of the 9th edition rulebook. That, in my opinion, is a bit folly. I think it's a good, if I can say anything about it, is good. It's the beginnings of a framework that allows you to create something a bit more interesting. But in and of itself, I think I'd struggle with the idea of using it day in, day out.
I think where it might excel, and it's because I did a slow grow campaign this time last year, or no, before this time last year, because it was before lockdown, but a slow grow campaign that had a bunch of custom rules to it where you could give units experience and upgrades, but like in a super simple way, like +1 save, +1 toughness, or like +1 AP or something really super simple. And there was a bunch of other different rules, but that's where I think this would excel. Like you're going to a regular club, there's a slow grow campaign, you start off at your 50 requisition, but you're predominantly doing your 25 power level combat patrol. You're doing that for a couple of months, then you're going up to incursion and then strike force. I think that'll work really well. Yeah, there's admin and stuff, but it allows you to play against a bunch of different armies. You can theme it to a setting if you want, but you don't have to. And that's what I think it would work. It's a good way of going. There's a good balancing mechanic, but whether it's super great, who knows? But at least they've attempted something. And it's a great way of telling a narrative story about your army, not necessarily a campaign. And I think this is the thing that this lacks, is that campaign setting, but potentially Beyond the Veil fixes that by giving us a setting with Crusade specific rules.
No, agreed. All right, cool. I reckon that'll do for that. Let's move on to the next segment where we're going to, I guess, respond to feedback from our glorious listeners, and maybe, Phil, I'll throw it out there, maybe you'll finally tell us what that Marine chapter is.
Oh, will.
All right, transitional noise. Woo! And that's it, everyone. The end of the show. Although you know better than that, it's not really the end of the show. It's this part of the show where we answer questions and or tell other fun little stories. One most pressing, because obviously Phil has been teasing the fact that he will be talking about a traitor legion at some point. I was going to broadly ask at some point, Phil, whether we should, get in on that conversation where we talk about if Games Workshop is finally too expensive. I don't know if you've got any opinions on that.
I do indeed. If we got time,
do you feel like we need to save that for another show, or do you want to address that here and now?
I don't want to get distracted. I want to tell you this story. If we have time at the end, we talk about prices.
Well, we'll come back to whether we think GW is too expensive another day.
Exactly. Today, this one's been 3 episodes in the making.
I mean, do you feel like it's going to live up to the expectations?
Probably not. I'm sorry to disappoint. But it's a really interesting 2-page story in the core rulebook. Are you going to tell us the 2-page story in this core rulebook? Well, no, I'm just going to talk about a little bit of it. The general setting.
A brief synopsis.
Yeah, a little bit. Not all of it. No spoilers or anything.
All right, well, let's sit back and enjoy Phil's story time.
But page 62, page 63 is where you will find said story.
Are you doing a read-along?
No, I'll read a few paragraphs because they're of note.
Basically, it's like one of those old audiobook things where you turn the page to the chime of Heretic Astartes or something.
Exactly, yeah. But basically, there's a character called Zeraviel, who is a Chaos Marine. He comes across a good Marine who's injured and slowly dying on the battlefield, and then this is where I'll do some reading. So he talks about he comes across a guy in ruby crystal with on the banner that's flaring ivory wings broken beneath the uncaring stars. The symbol proclaims the dying warrior as a scion from the thin-blooded shadows that fights beneath the banner of what was once an ancient and proud legion. He says Zerafiel knows the symbol well, not only from breaking it in battle, but also from wearing it in another age, in another war. So this is specifically a Blood Angels Chaos Warrior. Is your mind blown? You're like, no, I knew that was a thing.
No, I didn't necessarily realize that there was a specific story about the Blood Angel that has turned to chaos, though it has been heavily hinted that renegades can be drawn from all chapters at different points, right?
Yeah. So there's some more interesting little bits.
Please.
So later on, when they actually are talking to each other, he goes, his words come in a tongue serenely archaic, a dialect of Barlian that last saw common usage almost 400 generations ago, but enough of a language's roots remain in whatever derivations remain spoken amongst Baal's descendants today. The wounded warrior's eyes flared, 10,000 years of shifting lexicon, and still the victor's words were understood. So it's clearly implying that he's 10,000 years old, and that he is a proper kind of fallen warrior from the Horus Heresy. At least that was my take.
I mean, that makes more sense in so much as maybe during some kind of sequence of campaigns or things, he would have been cut off from the rest of his brethren and then was forced to, to join some other treacherous ranks for other reasons, right? Because I think that's one of the more interesting aspects of 40k is when, not all traitor legions or traitor legionaries or even necessarily traitor chapters or traitor marines or traitors are those that immediately fall to chaos. They're potentially, traitors for different reasons. I mean, if we recite or go back to the story where the Custodes turned around and started executing a chapter of Space Marines by virtue of some command that came down from on high based on some kind of miscommunication around suspicion of, some heresy.
Well, what's interesting with that is there's this inherent, 40k logic that the Imperium has, that if a chapter is able to fall to chaos, then any of the Gene brothers are also able to. So in the example you gave, the Custodes, basically there was a Primaris reinforcement of this chapter. The Primaris contingent was completely loyal, but the original chapter had fallen to chaos. So the Custodes believed that the Primaris Space Marines were likely to fall to chaos as well, because the bond of the Brotherhood is seen as being stronger than anything else. It's like with the Fallen, it's like the reason why it's a closely guarded secret is because they believe if that was if that came out, suddenly the regular Dark Angels would be viewed with suspicion that they too could fall to chaos. But then here we have an example where a Blood Angels person, maybe it's just one, maybe it was a whole unit, it doesn't quite say, but he fell to chaos. And it's like, is the implication that everyone could fall to chaos but just haven't?
Is that a specific, so is there more language in that short story that clearly indicates that this individual, this warrior, has fallen to chaos, or has he just broken rank with the Blood Angels?
So there's another bit, yes, which I was going to read out. It says, their eyes lock angelic brothers divided by 10,000 years of divided loyalty. One wears war-scarred black and gold. The other wears ravaged red. Both look youthful, yet one is ancient and ageless, the other young and dying. So the fact that he's in black and gold armor to me implies that he's Black Legion.
Yes, no, of course, that would be the reasonable assertion.
There is also somewhat spoilers, but there is he is possessed by a demon as well. So
right, okay, well, that'll probably
that clarifies your point that yes, he's definitely chaos rather than just like a renegade.
And I suppose then, but I guess then the point of origin becomes interesting, right? Because ultimately there are instances within the Black Legion and Talons of Horus books where Abaddon was remarking upon how hilarious it is to capture loyalist Space Marines and twist them into possessed Marines and then using them against their own chapters. So the idea is you get a bunch of Space Marines and then you get them possessed by demons and then you hurl them at your enemies because now they're demons, but they were formerly Imperial fists or whatever it
Well,
might be.
maybe then he could be one of those, and that he's like an unwitting traitor.
I mean, there's a lot of layers to it, right? But again, it's an interesting narrative because it tells us about the kind of the plight of the sort of the individual hero within 40k. And I think, Space Marines are a really fantastic thing within 40k because they are, as you correctly said, this brotherhood, but each of them individually is still able to function in a way that is so beyond, any kind of normal human limitations. And though they are optimal when they are gathered together in their groups of brothers, they are still incredibly capable and independent warriors when they're in those circumstances and situations. So I think it's interesting because it does sort of showcase a bit more of the kind of layers of depth to the narrative and the fact that, there's more to this than just marauding armies of mass size and scale. There are individual narratives and individual stories, which is fun to explore.
Yeah, because there's a bit later on, not in terms of the story, but in the book, because I've been just reading through all the sort of faction-specific stuff, and there's a bit where they talk about renegades and heretics. And with the renegades, what was interesting is they said all renegade Space Marines end up turning to chaos, which I didn't think was really the case. But what they say is that they're forced and they're pushed to. It's like they might not be deliberately going to chaos, but they might just have a ideological difference between and falling out with the Imperium. But because they're then fighting the Imperium, they're forced to make these pacts with the gods.
Have they at that point fallen to chaos, or are they themselves using chaos? Because Horus is interesting because Horus has not fallen to chaos. Horus is a champion of chaos. Horus is the War Master, and chaos is vying for his attention and wants him to be their champion. Zench, Nurgle, whoever have always wanted Abaddon to devote himself to. Sorry, not was I saying Horus before? Anyway, Abaddon, the War Master, has always been defiant, and he's using the Chaos Gods to serve his goals, which is the destruction of the Imperium. And I think that's always interesting because, it's not technically true that they always fall to chaos, but inevitably they probably need to utilize the forces of chaos because that's the only significant threat or significant, power source that will enable them to continue to wage war the way they want to. And it obviously serves the will of the dark gods.
Yeah, because when I was reading that and they were saying they inevitably fall to chaos, it's like, well, the whole point about the Badab War was there was no chaos involved in that. It was all miscommunication and sort of there was just differences that forced Imperium to fight Imperium. But as you say, in the end, some of them, such as Huron, turned into the Red Corsairs. So to an extent, they are correct. But are all of those chapters fallen to chaos now? I presume not. But I like the idea that you can have Marines just going renegade and not fall to chaos. But, maybe on the grander timeline of thousands of years, then yes, they would. But in that initial instance, that's not why they've gone renegade.
Yeah. And even then, it's very simplified. It's simplifying the narrative to suggest that they fall to chaos. Like, fair enough. The Crimson Slaughter fell to chaos, right? But they didn't really. To suggest they fell to chaos is even a bit kind of misguided. They are tortured by chaos. The Crimson Slaughter, essentially, I can't remember what they used to be called, but before they were the Crimson Slaughter, they were a really fantastic kind of ultra loyalist chapter. But essentially, I think bizarrely, the Crimson Slaughter, despite being all red and garish and corn-like, I think they're actually a derivative of Zench specifically, so they're more aligned with Zench. But they're basically just tortured constantly by all of this pain and anguish that comes from not spilling blood and not killing. So they're driven mad and have to go out there and murder and kill en masse in order to sort of to make the voices go away and all the rest of it. Is that having fallen to chaos? I mean, yeah, in so much as you are now doing something at the behest of chaos in some respects, but I don't necessarily know if they're willing participants at this point or just sad victims. And I don't know. It's one of those interesting things. It depends how you interpret the idea of falling to chaos, because I kind of state that as more of a voluntary decision. Like, I have given myself to chaos in return for gifts and powers that make me better.
Yeah.
Whereas chaos has done me over, and now I have to do what it wants, because otherwise my life is misery or something. But maybe the two are the same. It's a semantic.
Two sides of the same coin, I think.
Yeah. But still super interesting. The idea that a Blood Angel could take on the identity of the Black Legion and become a member of the Black Legion is a really interesting narrative, and feasible given the fact that so many of these Blood Angels would have had a really rough time over millennia. And also, if it's a heresy Blood Angel, who knows where he ended up at some point after all this went along. He could have just got sucked into the warp while fighting some demons and just found himself going, oh, okay, well, I guess this is me now. Yeah.
The book's very good at having these very cool stories that make you then want to go, I want to know more, or I want to do something with this.
Yeah, I love it for that. And it's one of the best things about 40k is the way that they plant these little narrative ideas and create opportunities for you to try and explore those ideas further. I mean, it's cool, man. I mean, you reference the Badab War. The Badab War in like Rogue Trader or whatever it was like a paragraph. It was like, there was a war between Marines. Cheers. I think back in the day they did some like big spread because they introduced loads of new chapters for it. But irrespective, it was same thing with the Horus Heresy. Wasn't the Horus Heresy like just like
that was like a
text?
paragraph in the original Adeptus Titanicus to explain why you've got two identical Titans painted differently fighting each other.
Yeah, incredible, isn't it? The idea of we don't have enough models. How do we spin this? I don't know. Is there some bloke called Horus? Yeah, Horus will do. Noting that the name Horus, like if you met a Horus, like for us in the 40k world, Horus has some sort of gravitas to it. But if you met a Horus, they're not, they're normally, that's the sort of name you might associate with a bit of like, like a village idiot or something.
I mean, to any person out there called Horus, I'm sorry.
Well, of course. I mean, they've probably had it hard enough, Phil. If that offends them,
if they're not collecting chaos, they're doing something wrong as well.
Well, clearly. On the topic of doing something wrong, though, should we address some community questions? We'll get for a few of them, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so I'm going to head over to the old Facebook comments because last time I did Instagram. Just a point of clarification. So normally Monday or Tuesday every week I'll do a community post on our Facebook and Instagram, just doing a shout out for what topic we'll be recording because we record on a Tuesday night. And please leave some comments on those posts if you want to get involved. Because I realise that we do this thing, but we haven't actually explained exactly how people can get involved in them. So yeah, Monday or Tuesday night, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You might see our post pop up. That's where you engage with us with these questions. So the first one is from a guy called Daniel, or over on the old Facebooks. He says, some buddies and I did a Siege of Rax style crusade using the current rules for each army and homebrew rules for the Renegades and Death Korps. It's been great fun and we're eager to finish it as we're already planning the next one. But I wish there were some ideas for storylines or structures to play rather than it just being random. For example, here's a start point and then a roadmap as you go along. It's also, with some of the codices, makes Space Marine super hard to enjoy playing against, especially as non-updated armies. And I assume he means not just the fact that Space Marines are a powerful codex, but also they've got all their Crusade specific rules versus armies that don't have Crusade specific rules.
Yeah. And that is a problem, right? Because ultimately not having a 9th edition book is always going to create a bit of an imbalance with this sort of stuff because, the difference between the Marines and, say, the Krieg in this example is, extraordinarily vast because they just don't have those kind of options. What is interesting, I suppose, is the idea that Daniel here is talking about using the Siege of Rax as the kind of, baseline of the Crusade, yet he's suggesting that he doesn't have a framework to kind of build it into from a narrative perspective. I suppose it just probably is going to require you to spend more time kind of reading and picking a kind of a drop point, as it were, in terms of when you enter the system and how you then start to insert your games around it. Because obviously there are various named characters and critical players that take place in all of the Siege of Rax events, and not everyone is going to be able to use those characters. So it's going to come down to how you kind of insert those armies into those environments and come up with narrative reasons for those guys to be there. There are some really easy wins, like things like Drakari are really easy to add to campaigns because they're very opportunistic. And, they pop out from the webway and cause some problems and then go away again. But obviously, if you want to start adding like orcs to these kind of encounters or whatever, Siege of Rax not involve orcs? Did it involve orcs?
No,
I can't remember
not
now.
at all.
That's what I thought.
If you had, for example, the original Siege of Rax books, which were a trilogy, there's some great missions, and that does lead you through a kind of story point from A to B. So as a brief overview of some of the stuff that they do is like an initial thing might be like a city fight, or it might be a no man's land battle, and then you might go on a tangent story in a spaceport, because in one of them it's like, I think the Dark Angels come down via the spaceport and they're trying to capture it. There's others where they're underground and using the Zone Mortalis rules because they're trying to capture the depots with all the old tanks in. So you could do that. Then there's another mission which is like in no man's land, and there's just a ton of destroyed tanks, and that is your only kind of terrain. And then it eventually builds up to the actual siege of the city, and then you're getting more kind of city fighting and, big walls of and with defenses and stuff like that. So you could do those things if you sort of know the story, or if you have those books, you could repurpose old missions and kind of come up with new variants on them, which I think would be super fun to do, actually. Either with that or something like Badab War, I think would be a great one to take all of that kind of lore and story and, the missions that they did have, and then just repurpose them.
I did 2 campaign weekends playing Badab War. That was fantastic. We did 2 campaign weekends up in Mansfield back in 2011. We played 2 campaign weekends recapping the events of the Badab War, and that was just an amazing series of campaign weekends that I hugely enjoyed, and that was a really fun system, and that incorporated all sorts of elements from that narrative and how they kind of wove that into everything, and really good. But I that's the problem, isn't it? You need to understand the setting, and you need to know what you're kind of bringing to it, and then you need to, again, as I was sort of saying way back in the kind of core of the content, someone's gonna have to at least put a bit of work into this to get it off the ground if you want to make it into something meaningful. But the Imperial Armor books do a great job of giving you a meaningful environment to set your games within, I would say.
Yeah, a good kind of sandbox to just dive into without you having to do the legwork of creating it all from scratch.
Yeah, which I think is the right mixture, right? I think Crusade alone is not enough, but I think once you start adding in some of these other flavors, like the Vigilus stuff, or you could start looking at things like the Wrath of Magnus, for example, or whatever you want, right? Because that involved a bunch of different factions in different ways. There's lots of interesting elements that you can
Yeah.
add into your.
I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't just take the not Siege of Rex, the Vigilus campaign, and just layer on the customization of your army using the Crusade rules. But the actual campaign itself and the storyline of the campaign is all using those Vigilus books and the missions from there. So yeah.
Equally, you could do none of the Crusade system and just play some games based in those settings by adding in, custom units or things that you feel like you've agreed with your opponents to pick those heroes or whatever in a more streamlined fashion. I mean, again, that's the joy with narrative play. That's the joy with any tabletop war game. It's limited by your imagination, right? Like you can do whatever you want.
Speaking of which, I'll go on to the next one because it does sort of tie in. So this is also from Facebook, a guy called Andrew. He says, as someone with a homebrew Space Marine chapter, I feel like Crusade offers the opportunity to chart its history and develop my own special characters. Hopefully it won't be too long before I'm able to get together with my friends to try it out. And this is where I think he's hit the nail on the head, is it's all about charting the history and development of your own army, less so than about a campaign. It could do both, but out of the box, it's all about your army and what it's done, what its history is, and creating the special characters.
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting, isn't it? Because does it depict... Because again, at its core, it feels like it's more about war bands than it is about... Like, this would be a great system if you were just playing it with, like... If we all got together and we went, right, we're all doing Chaos Space Marine war bands, like, I think the system can start to feel interesting because there's, a baked-in setting and an idea, but the way the system works is it feels more accustomed to that, because Chaos Space Marine war bands are essentially ragtag bunch of pals who get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until they become the Black Legion or something of that equivalence. Whereas when it comes to armies like chapters, like it doesn't really spell out the story of your chapter so much because you're not starting with a chapter and then working out narrative. You're starting with a very specific detachment of a chapter that is, maybe 1/5, 1/10 of one of the there's chapters and then down into companies.
Yeah.
And so it's 1/10 of a company. So it's a very different vibe,
but
right?
I think that's fine. In terms of the history, it's the history of the battles that your army has played in. It's like, for me, with my Minotaurs, it's like I'm looking at the 8th company predominantly. And yeah, I might add in first company and other companies as I go. And that sort of is exactly what Crusade does. It's like you start off with a small force. It might just be one company. And as your army grows via the Crusade system, you can then start adding in other companies. And it's like, yes, they lore-wise already exist, but maybe you've gone on some missions which has created this grander story arc that means you can then pull in these resources and get more of your fellow chapter involved in the missions that you're doing because of the urgency of them.
Yeah, I mean, you can approach it in a lot of different ways, and I think genuinely, it gives you options to flesh that stuff out. I think, I don't think you can do it. I just don't know necessarily if it quite fits what he's describing here, because again, Space Marine chapters feel very different from what you're experiencing here, which is more a ragtag bunch of things that then you start to add in lots of extra stuff as you want to, and then
well, I think you need to look at it in terms of your initial army is a small like an incursion force, or it's a patrol. It's not a fully formed chapter, and you're not your Crusade, was it the battle order is not your chapter, and you are the chapter master, and you're picking and choosing which bits of your chapter to go off onto a 25 power limit combat patrol. That's not what it is.
Yeah, agreed.
It's you got to kind of draw a line somewhere between realism and gameplay, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's fine. It's again, you can add those elements to it as you see fit, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Yeah, got some good ones over on the old Instagram now. So
Right.
Kevin James McGill, he says, "Hello guys, love the show. Thank you. Haven't played Crusade yet, but very interesting to hear what you have to say. Question: Do you think this type of game is do you think this is a good type of game or play style for beginners or more for seasoned vets?"
I don't really think it's for either.
Bit harsh.
No, look, for beginners, it's a terrible system. It really doesn't work for beginners at all because it if you're a beginner, the last thing you need is a load of extra stuff, right? I mean, we can pretty much agree on that.
No, I actually do agree with you on this. If you're learning the game, don't touch Crusade. Once you are a casual gamer, you understand the base rules, you understand your army, how it works. You don't need to be a good gamer, but once you understand all the basics of how the game works, then you can add this in. So you don't need to be a seasoned gamer to play it, but you don't need to be off the back rookie, like first game ever. Like you want to have a good 10 games under your belt before you start.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like, I think that's actually where it's best. I think it's a great system for you and your mates to play more games. Like, that's fine. Like, to me, it's a good thing to add nuance and intrigue and interesting layers to people who are maybe playing in the kind of mid-level gaming and want to kind of do these campaigns and build things up. I think the veteran players aren't going to be interested because for the reasons why I, as a veteran player, am not interested because it just doesn't do anything for me. I'm sorry. As I said, I'll try it just for the sake of it, but
fair enough.
As a veteran player, it doesn't really give me what I want, so I'm not interested because it just doesn't work on the scale that I want it to work, and it's just a bit too binary for me.
I guess I think for you it's maybe a bit of a halfway house. It's a bit narrative, but it's not narrative enough to make you want to do narrative.
It's the living in suburbs of of games, right? It's like, and I'm not really, it's not really what I'm looking for. And yeah, I think that's the thing. I think it's perfect for people somewhere in the middle. I don't really feel like it has much to offer to a new player, and I definitely don't feel like it has much to offer to someone like me. But I think for people who are, getting together and playing games regularly with groups of friends and trying to figure out or trying to have something that kind of links it all together, having some some links between games is cool because it adds layers to it, and I think that's good. And also it encourages players to do more because you earn your requisition points and you turn it into 5 power level. That's something you need to now add to your collection. So maybe it incentivizes you to paint stuff and make stuff, and I think that's great. I think for people coming together and going, I want to play more games, me and 5 friends are going to do new armies and we're going to use this as a system, fine.
Yeah,
I think over time you'll drop it because I don't think you'll be once it gets you to where you want it to be. I think you'll all start getting headaches and nosebleeds and try and remember everything that's going on.
I sort of think you're right in terms of not the nosebleeds, but there's a group of gamers that are all doing maybe a second army, a bit tying it back to our last episode. If you're wanting to start new armies as a group, a bunch of you doing it together, hashtag New Year, New Army, then this is probably a great system. It's like a built-in...
Can we still say New Year, New Army in March?
I guess so.
Yeah, why not? We just did, didn't we? So
for that kind of slow grow campaign, that's you don't have to think about at what pace the army grows at. It's baked into the Crusade system, so it's all done for you. Brilliant. You can slowly paint up over 6 months or a year, or whatever it takes you to get to your 2,000 points. And then at that stage, if you want to drop it and go, I can now go to tournaments with this army because that's really what I want it for, you can do. But you had a fun time getting there.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I mean, I've done plenty of these getting through my hobby experience, and they've always been fun experiences in and of themselves, but I've kind of outgrown it to this point now because I've got too much stuff and I'm too established with what I have in my collection and my ability to play those kind of bigger scale games more frequently. So, yeah, I think, if you're someone like me, I think you probably agree with me that it's not quite what you're looking for. If you're a newbie, it's not what you're looking for. But if you're something in between, yeah, why not?
And
last one, Phil. I'll give you one more.
There's two good ones. First one's quite short. No, sorry.
All right.
All right. So
it's only because I'm conscious of the fact that we're getting to another 3-hour-long podcast on a weekly basis.
What joy for the listeners on their
Exactly.
long commutes that they're sleeping through. So
I think we might have just gone past 3 hours, or we're definitely getting close to it. But anyway, please carry on.
So Ethical Ice Cream, he says, have you tried open war cards in 9th edition? I'm waiting on a set to arrive in the post. It looks like a halfway house between competitive and narrative. Love to hear your thoughts
Didn't we
on
answer this last week?
Different ways of playing. Only in the sense of we should probably look at it.
Yeah, so the answer is no, but we should. And do we want to give more than that? What's your thoughts?
No, I agree. I think, there's some good options in terms of playing the game. I think we've sort of seen that Crusade looks like a good option, maybe not the best.
Yeah.
Maelstrom we've looked at is a pretty solid.
We like Maelstrom. We like Maelstrom.
Imagine Maelstrom with Crusade. Too much, too crazy.
Flipping egg.
Too much random.
The blood will be coming out of both nostrils. Out of my ears.
And then so open play is the last sort of one to look at. Obviously, there's competitive as well.
Phil, when you're able to do so, you can come over and we're going to play open war. We're not going to bother with open war on Tabletop Simulator. We'll wait till we are together again, and we're open war. Yeah,
brilliant. No, that sounds good.
Deal. We're open warring, all for the benefit of what was his name? Ice Cream.
Ethical Ice Cream Truck.
Ethical Ice Cream. All for your benefit.
So last
and then
one.
We'll tell you
is a bit of a long one, but he actually has played Crusade, so I feel like this is a valid point.
Is it Toke?
No, it's not.
Toke
is waiting on us to tell him whether Crusade is good or not.
Oh, I see. Don't play it, Toke. Don't waste your time.
So Michael_Paints says, we've had a couple of Crusade stages here in Hanoi. What an interesting place. And it's been interesting. There has not been much COVID here, so it's been possible to get games in regularly at the local shop. The first stage had quite a lot of farming, and I assume he means XP farming in that respect.
Yeah. Which is potentially a reference to what I said people would do.
Well, exactly, which is why I thought this one was a good one to read out. The second stage was a bit quieter, and now we've just started a more structured, narrative-driven stage with a setting, the rationale for our forces arriving there, the Bastion system, and one player from each battle being tasked with writing a battle report. I'm not much of a competitive gamer. I prefer painting and story, so rarely actually go out to win battles, but prefer the idea of developing units and their stories in their ultimate fruitless attempt for glory. Although some of the missions boil down to hold this objective, which it does, it adds a bit more interest than match play. For at least him. One downside of Crusade is seen that inexperienced Crusade armies can get smacked down by those that have been crusading for a while. The extra CP helps out, having less effect when a beefed up enemy unit is rerolling ones, getting exploding sixes, for example. Which was sort of our worry that we pointed out, like the balancing mechanic might not be just enough. In its own,
it's nearly enough.
And as I said, I think maybe custom stratagems that deal with using just those CPs might be a better way of doing it that can have a greater influence on the game. So if you think about Blood Bowl, going back to that example, you get a bunch of oh my god, what's it called? You get a bunch of petty cash. For the game only, which is what this bonus CP is, but you get to spend that on stuff. You can get extra players, you can get star players, you can get wizards, or Budweiser kegs. So your wizard can cause a spell to knock the ball out of someone's hand or knock someone's down. It's like the difference allows you to actually have a meaningful impact in the game beyond I'm doing some stratagem. So I think it needs that to try and balance it out, I think. but that's pure speculation.
Yeah, I mean, not that I feel like first edition Age of Sigmar is ever something that we want to start referencing as a good thing, but even that had some interesting ideas for dealing with the mass imbalance between armies, because they essentially created a system that acknowledged the idea that you could be playing against the equivalent of 6,000 points with 100 points, but as a result there was essentially a mission critical stipulation that if you accomplished, you won regardless. And those kind of things could have been interesting, or, you know, potentially you could add some kind of interesting kind of like penalties to units that have a lot of renown or have a lot of crusade points or whatever. So if they get pitted up against something of lesser status, maybe if they lose to that in some way, shape, or form, then they have other issues, like they seem less in the eyes of their comrades. So if like your commander goes into a duel with an enemy warlord and his crusade points are far higher, if they lose that duel, like if the enemy commander slays your commander, but his power level, or rather crusade point level is so much lower, maybe you immediately have to, you know, like you don't roll the d6, and if you get a 1, blah, blah, you have to resolve the impact of
it. So you could have, you know, specific agendas for those levels, but the agendas is just to do with XP after the mission. It doesn't affect winning the actual one. So you could have, as you say, sort of specific objectives that get unlocked if you're a weaker one, to allow you to get extra victory points, or penalties and handicaps for those more experienced armies.
An element of risk, but then also accept the fact that a lot of people will possibly forget to note that game down. Oh yeah, that one didn't happen. I remember the first time I did a Necromunda campaign, and mysteriously I managed to get exactly what I needed to roll in order to give my gang leader the weapon that the model came with, because it was like, oh yeah.
See, this is why I think when they say you could roll but also just choose, it because they sort of, I think, know people will fudge their dice rolls to get the battle traits that they want or the scars that they want. So just let them pick. There's certain sort of honesty box sort of system going on in that, if you are going to ensure everyone is doing dice rolls.
It's super interesting to hear about. Sorry, I've forgotten the name of this guy, but the experience that they're outlining there in terms of like the early beginnings, and then what it kind of turned into, and then them essentially taking their established kind of like rosters and then actually turning it into an overarching narrative campaign. And I think, in a way, what they're expressing and what they're doing is in line with what we've said throughout, which is that eventually it leads to a system where you realize that you need to add in extra layers from other better crafted narrative source materials and campaign books, because Crusade isn't really enough to do what narrative players want it to do. But, you know, look, I mean, it's, you know, I suppose it's an icebreaker, I guess. It just needs to be rewritten so it makes more sense. I just think it's a badly put together series of rules that needs a bit of finessing. But other than that, I mean, whatever, right? The missions are cool. I mean, I'm looking forward to maybe playing some of these missions. Again, it's not really been an option up till now because we've all been obsessed with the idea of just grinding out the GT mission pack. But yeah, I'd love to,
because you could just take some of those missions and still just do a match play game with them. There's nothing stopping you from doing that.
Agreed. And that's much more what I'm in favor of. I don't, you know, and then not bothering with the agendas because they have no influence on the game, because you're not worried about the experience that you're gaining. So just be like, yeah, I don't care. I'm just going to play, you know, one of these missions, and that'll be fun. So yeah, I'm into that. I like that aspect of it. I'm less worried about the Crusade side of it, but it's been interesting to explore it. I'm glad that I finally read it, and I'm glad that I now know what it is. and it only reaffirms my original belief that it's not something I'm madly invested in. But
I tried, people.
Well, look, man. I mean, look. When I say I'm not madly interested in it, I just know what I'm like. I've never been that bothered about this sort of stuff because it's never quite what I want it to be. Plus, I've just never seen them work that well. People lose interest after a while, and people fall out of it. You always get, when this sort of stuff used to happen at gaming clubs, like we'd all turn up week 1 to play our campaign game. We'd all turn up week 2, week 3. Oh, so-and-so can't make it. And then the whole thing just falls over.
Well, this is where it doesn't need to be a campaign. The whole point is you can just do Crusade. A bunch of you can all do Crusade.
Yeah, but we've established that doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some issues there. But if you're casual gaming, you could all just say, we're all casually gaming, but we're all doing Crusade. And that works really well for pickup games, dropping in and out. You're telling your own story with your Crusade. You're not doing a campaign in the kind of classical sense of the word, but it works and allows you to just keep plugging away with it regardless of who you're playing against.
I mean, it works unless it doesn't.
I guess.
Yeah, but I suppose that's true of everything. All right, cool. Next week in this segment we'll address the whole is GW too expensive these days, because that's been the other one that's been doing the rounds I've seen. Recasting seems to be the topic of conversation again at the moment.
Oh, the one I was thinking about is how Games Workshop Stealth updates its articles.
Oh, mate, well, have they actually retrospectively gone back and changed the kill team boxes?
I don't know about the Killzone ones, but one of the articles talked about how in Kill Team Pariah it came with the core rules. It does not, and they changed it to amend that fact and not really announce it.
Wow. Did people screen grab that? Obviously,
there's I can't remember his name now. There was a YouTube video all about it because he had gone through the original article and has since been retrospectively changed.
Wow.
It is a bit like the Uriel Ventress. We said they'd updated the images of his face because they've changed the head sculpt.
I don't think they changed the head sculpt, though. I just think they did a different paint job on it.
No, it's definitely slightly different sculpt, because in the first one, he doesn't have a comm on his ear, and then the final version does.
Oh, wow. Interesting, isn't it? I think they've been doing a lot of shady business lately.
Yeah, I mean, like the first thing we noticed was when they did the Forge World Legends PDF, and then like an hour or two later, they did an update to it, but they didn't announce that update in any way. Yeah. And it's like, just tell people, like, it's not a problem. People want to hear these things.
Yeah. But again, it's just sort of makes the whole thing feel a bit kind of whimsical, as it were, where they're like, just changing stuff on the fly. We'll tell you 1 minute that, what's his face raptor bloke is king of the raptors, and then the next minute he's not, but then we'll retrospectively change it again. But yeah, the stuff with the Killzone stuff was really weird. Like the idea that they went, hey guys, look, Killzones, and you were like, oh cool, like the old boxes, great, I'm well in for that. And I genuinely bought the crate one because I thought it was the same thing that I was getting last time. So I was like, oh, cool. 6 crates and some cranes. Like, who can't use those? So I just bought it immediately with a bunch of other stuff that I pre-ordered, because I also did pre-order Kill Team because I've got all the Kill Team books and I wanted the heavy intercessors and I like the idea of doing a Necron Kill Team because I got Necron stuff, blah, blah, blah. But it's one of those things where, like, I did genuinely buy it because of the advertising that they did when they said this stuff was going on pre-order. So I genuinely have pre-ordered that thing because of Games Workshop.
I don't think there was anything shady about it. I think it was an honest mistake where they just reused the old artwork, probably not realizing that the boxes got updated. But what I find a bit egregious is they've taken stuff out of the boxes, so there's less content in them, or lesser value perceived content, but then the price has gone up. So the Sector Mechanicum one, you had a big cylinder unit with the walkways and stuff like that, and that's now all gone, and instead you've got the chimney stacks, which was always there, but now you just got a ton of piping, and it's like, I don't need more pipes. Like, the thing that sold me on that was the big cylinder and the walkway stuff, because that ties in much better. It gives you more vertical terrain. That's what I wanted it for. And I was looking at those boxes, really wanting to buy them, and I've just sort of sat on the fence at the moment because I just don't think there's much value out of, especially that one, because it comes with a bunch of pipes.
Yeah.
I think there's, the issue there is there's been a few things in the space of like a week or 2 weeks. There's the kill team kill zones being misadvertised, going up in price as well from the original ones, and advertised as the original ones. You've got Kill Team Pariah Nexus being quite expensive for what it is.
See, I feel like we're now spoiling next week's potential content.
Yes.
So tell you what, Phil, we'll get back to this conversation.
Is this our tease for this week?
This is now our teaser, so that'll do. I know, right? God, we're getting good at these. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.